Welcome, members, to the committee. My name is Terry Dennis. I'm the chair. With us today, we have Ms. Jennifer Bowes, Mr. Derek Myers, Mr. Daryl Harrison, Mr. Terry Jensen, Mr. Tim McLeod, and Mr. Dana Scorpad. Morning, everyone. We have another busy day ahead of us. Is there any documents or anything? Nothing to the table. Committee members, before you have a copy of today's meeting notice with our agenda. This morning we will be considering the annual reports for Saskatchewan Opportunities Commission and the annual reports and the provincial auditors chapter for SaskPower. This afternoon we will be considering the annual reports for the provincial auditor chapters for SaskTel and CIC. We will now consider the 2018-19 and 2019-20 and 2020-21 annual reports for SOCO. Minister Morgan, please introduce your officials and make your opening comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. It's my pleasure to be here this morning for the committee's consideration of matters pertaining to the Saskatchewan Opportunities Corporation, or SOCO. Joining me here today are the following officials: Brent Sukenick, Acting President and Chief Executive Officer, Jackie Persnell, Acting Vice President of Business Development, and Charles Reid, Senior Ministerial Assistant in my office. The purpose of the corporation is to support and facilitate the advancement and success of Saskatchewan's technology and key growth sectors through the development and operation of research parks. As you're aware, SOCO operates the research and technology parks in Regina and Saskatoon on land leased from the universities. Both of these facilities operate under the registered trade name of Innovation Place. The core strategic basis for research and technology parks is that the physical clustering of technology organizations in a campus environment provides the opportunity for greater success through the benefits of intercompany collaboration and networking, sector-specific programming and education, and through economies of scale. Implicit in this strategy is that the larger and more engaged the localized cluster is, the greater the benefits are. The primary clusters of focus at Innovation Place include agritech, information and communication technology, health and life sciences, natural resources, and industry services and support. Of particular note is that the three largest sectors at Innovation Place are in direct alignment with several of the actions and goals reflected in the Saskatchewan Growth Plan, providing a significant opportunity to be leveraged. Information and communications technology is the largest sector in both of the parks, with 52 individual companies and an estimated 1,350 employees. This sector has seen the highest level of growth over the past few years, increasing by 9 companies since March of 2019. Primarily focused in Saskatoon, there are currently 35 agritech companies at the parks, with a total of nearly 450 employees. This sector has also realized steady growth over the past few years, with significant tenants being added in the past year. The Global Institute for Food Security started occupying 33,000 square feet of lab, greenhouse, and office space in the Saskatoon Park in late 2020. The third largest sector is natural resources, with 28 companies operating within the parks, employing approximately 1,200 people. Being strategically located adjacent to Saskatchewan's two universities, Innovation Place is also part of a much larger scientific community that includes university colleges and faculty members, research institutes, and other technology-related institutions. These dynamic, collaborative communities are designed to help move ideas out of the laboratory and into the marketplace. They are also great places for local graduates to begin and grow their careers. Within the clusters of the parks, the primary target for tenants is Saskatchewan-based private technology companies. These companies have the greatest opportunity for employment growth and will display the strongest ongoing loyalty to Innovation Place and the province. On March 31, 2021, there were 144 tenants leasing space at the parks. 88% of these tenants are private sector businesses and research organizations, all involved in the technology fields. Collectively, these companies employ approximately 3,700 people, of which 95% have completed some form of post-secondary education. Although having the right tenants at the parks provides the foundation for collaboration, a key component of Innovation Place's business model is to actively promote the interaction of tenants. Extensive programming activities at Innovation Place supports an ecosystem that fosters innovation and collaboration for tenants by facilitating forums to network, learn, and create business opportunities. Although the number of events hosted this past year was down due to the pandemic, in normal years, there are generally in excess of 170 events hosted. The specialized nature of buildings and infrastructure at Innovation Place is a key component in providing the appropriate technical environment required by tenants. In addition to high-quality office buildings, tenants have access to research, greenhouse space, growth rooms, and a variety of laboratory buildings. The buildings provide tenants with specialized capabilities needed for sophisticated science and technology activities. Mechanical systems provide the air, water, and steam in qualities and quantities that far exceed what is normally available commercially. Certain process utilities such as high-pressure steam and chilled water are distributed on a park-wide basis. This specialized infrastructure facilitated the addition of the Global Institute of Food Security as a tenant during this past year and will be instrumental in the establishment of the Global Agri-Food Advancement Partnership Incubator at Innovation Place this year. Another key component in SOCO's business model is the business environment provided to tenants driven by the view that each tenant has unique needs. Through regular communication and a collaborative approach, SOCO builds unique relationships with each of their tenants. These unique business relationships are built around several different factors, including, but not limited to, how leases are structured, how products are priced, the risk tolerance accepted, and general support provided. At any given time, approximately 30% of Innovation Place tenants are benefiting from flexible and supportive business arrangements. With respect to the annual reports under consideration today, SOCO generated a net income of $0.6 million in fiscal 2020-21, down from the $3 million reported for 2019-20. The decrease in net income is due to an increase in vacancy at the parks. Overall vacancy at March 31st, 2021 was 14.96, up from the 11.5% reported at the end of the prior year. Also contributing to the decrease in net income is lower parking revenue, as many tenant employees worked from home during the year. Despite the increase in vacancy, SOCO continues to be successful in attracting new technology opportunities to the parks. Over the past 3 years, 36 new technology businesses were started within the parks. Following a successful pivot to online programming due to the pandemic, Innovation Place offered 66 business development and networking events during the past fiscal year, attracting 4,600 attendees. Since 1993, there have been a total of just under 200 new technology businesses started at Innovation Place, 68% of which are still in operation today. Tenant satisfaction continues to be strong, with SOCO earning a 92% overall satisfaction rating from tenant CEOs during 2020-21. In addition, dividends of $557,000 and equity repayment of $1 million was provided to Crown Investments Corporation during the year. Mr. Chair, it's my pleasure to entertain the committee's questions at this time.
Thank you, Minister. Do any members have any questions? I recognize Ms. Jennifer Bowes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Greetings to everyone present. Starting with the 18-19 annual report, a few questions. One, on page 2, there's a bit of commentary about the utilidor, which also known as the utility corridor. And it's, I do have just a question about when that was created, what the benefit of that connection is as well in practical terms.
Thank you for the question. Brent Sukanik, Acting President and CEO for Innovation Place. The utilidor connects the energy center. So in Saskatoon, we have a central heating and cooling plant, and that connects to most of our buildings there. And I don't know exactly when it was constructed, but it was several years ago. And it provides not only the basic heating and cooling for the building, but it also provides the special process utilities that helps with the scientific processes that happen in several of our buildings.
Okay. Thank you. And then just turning to page 4, I'm wondering if we can get a bit of information updated on how the Connexus Business Incubator is doing, how it's doing in Regina.
Yes. As you can recall from or you will recall from our last meeting, the Connexus cultivator started in our park and has since moved to be located at their own facility, and they have been quite successful. They have just in recent documentations published on their website, and this was information as of January 1st, 2021. They've worked with 52 companies. They've raised $13.4 million in private capital. They've created 172 jobs and had $17.8 million in public funding obtained. So they've been quite successful in their operation.
Sorry, I just missed the last.
They've been quite successful.
Excellent, thank you. And then I know I'd asked a bit about this back in the spring as well, but I'm wondering if you can provide some information on the COM-IT program and give us an update on that.
That over to my colleague, Jackie.
Joined by Jennifer Presnell, who I introduced at the beginning, but this is her first time appearing in committee, so I'm expecting robust questioning from her.
Good morning. Jackie Presnell, Acting Vice President, Business Development. So the COM-IT program was a partnership we delivered. It's a coding program that was provided to students. The company runs these programs in about 15 cities across Canada. They're a charity. They link people struggling to overcome some employment barriers with companies looking for talented IT professionals. They target skills gap in the labor market, and they focus on the tools and languages that are required by the local companies. They also deal with some of the soft skills and professional development. Programs are planned, developed, and executed by local professionals, so there's local IT people that come in and deliver the programs. And our involvement has been typically providing the home for those programs, so the classes take place in our buildings. They have gone virtual during the pandemic, but we anticipate working with them again.
Thanks, Jackie. And I was wondering, too, if you could let me know how the uptake has been on that program.
Yes, actually. The stats that we have from their from the global or their national program is that they're in about 15 cities. They've worked with over 150 companies, helped over 750 people in training, and about 550 of those people have got jobs.
Excellent, thank you. And then I'm wondering, for a separate program, for the STING program, how many students are typically hired each summer through that program? I know we touched on this in the spring, but.
The STING program?
Yes. It's also on page 4 of the annual report. It says it's a new initiative of the University of Saskatchewan to employ summer students to develop commercialization plans for university-owned intellectual property. Yeah.
That's a program that we worked with the university on their summer entrepreneurs program. We provided some space for them. The intent was that the entrepreneurs worked with proprietary or research information coming out of the university and looked to see whether that was a commercial opportunity or not. They were essentially sort of paid to be entrepreneurs as interns. They ran the program for a couple of years, and this past year they suspended it for partially because of COVID and partially because of some changes made to that unit at the U of S.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess finally, also on page 4, there's reference to collabs, and wondering if you can give me an update on how collabs has been doing, any new developments there.
Question. Collabs, again, I'm just going to provide information that's posted on their website. But since inception, they've created 353 jobs. The startups incubated is 131 now. They have revenue generated of just under $21 million and investment raised of $11.58 million.
Great, thank you. And then just some general questions. What plans are in place to address the vacancy shortfalls that exist at both parks? If you can give me an update there since we last spoke in spring.
Thank you. Not a lot has changed since the spring. We continue to focus on, first and foremost, on retaining our existing tenants. And part of that right now is helping them return to the office, get all of their employees back to the parks. We're also working with our various stakeholders on ensuring that we've got the right product to offer them, as well as to attract other companies to our parks. So again, it's the partnerships that we're focusing on.
I think you'll be aware that the target vacancy rate is around 10%, so that there's sufficient vacancy available when somebody comes in, and now being in excess of 15% is certainly not where they want to be as they've come out of the pandemic, as Mr. Suganik has indicated. Hopefully there'll be greater uptake, and I'm sure they'll be watching for opportunities. So that's certainly underway, and hopefully the situation with the pandemic doesn't change and that we see continued economic growth. But as you're aware, numbers are in flux.
Yeah, thanks for that. And my understanding is that vacancy levels have been 10% or higher since 2016. And so I can understand how the pandemic would have some impact there. But can you, I mean, it seems to have predated the pandemic by a number of years. And can you sort of explain the vacancy rates since that time, since around 2016? The
loss of ISM, one of the major tenants in the Regina location, has certainly created a bigger hole in the loss. Usually it's the coming and going are businesses that operate on relatively small footprint, but that one was a big corner at the end of one of the larger buildings. So there's no doubt that's going to be a harder one to build. So that was a significant setback. So the business plan right now is to work to fill the existing spaces, and as those fill up, then look at opportunities to try and rebuild or repurpose the space that was left by ISM.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm gonna move on now to, apologies, this is the first time I've done a series of annual reports. Do I get to just sort of move on as I see fit, or? Okay.
So we've done on the last ones that we've done is that they're your questions, and if you go back and forth between the two of them, you don't have to finish your questions on one and vote it off. You use the time as you see fit. So we'll make sure that the officials are flexible and nimble enough they can answer them.
Thanks, I appreciate that. Okay. So then flipping to 2019-2020, on page 1 of the report, it references in 2014 that the Board of Directors developed and implemented a new strategic direction. So I know we also had spoke a little bit about this back in the spring, so just hoping to get an update there on the new strategic direction and any commentary you can provide.
The new strategic direction, it evolves. We actually have a strategy planning session with the board tomorrow to review where we're at and where we're going. But the main focus of it was really implemented this year. And there's two main components when it's looking at tenant facing. One is our value proposition. So it involves taking a look at our product, all of the tools that we use to grow the tech sector, and making sure that we have the right product. And that might be whether we have the right scientific infrastructure, whether we have the right programming, and we offer the right support to companies that reside in our parks. So that's the first part, is to make sure we've got the right product. The second part of the new strategy is looking at how we can leverage our product more. And that's somewhat of what I've talked about before, is how do we partner more with our stakeholders? How do we provide access to our toolbox to benefit them? And then there's a few examples of that. There's one of our tenants, Saskatoon, is AgWest Bio, who supports the agri-tech industry, and we partnered with them on several initiatives this year. One is providing access to the Boffins Event Center. So we have joint programming, and they offer their own programming through our space. We're also partnering with them and other entities for the Global Agri-Food Advancement Center, which is somewhat of a hybrid incubator for the ag tech sector. So it's really looking at how we can leverage our product more.
Okay. I'm wondering too then, if we can get some updated, I guess an updated account of the impacts of the pandemic in terms of those impacts on SoCo. Has there been anything notable since we last met in spring?
There has not been a huge impact of the pandemic outside of the impact on our environment. In the spring, I talked about it. It's still the same issue. Is we provide an environment for our tenants to collaborate with each other. When they're not in our parks, the collaboration is way down. So one of our focuses is getting people back to the parks so the collaboration can continue. From a vacancy perspective, we haven't had any major tenants vacate because of the pandemic. We have had some smaller tenants that have elected to work from home during this, but we do hope that we'll get them back to the parks as soon as the pandemic's over and that environment's back.
Okay, thanks. And do you have an update on sort of a look at how many of the tenants are still operating remotely at this point versus on site?
Yes, we are currently at, just bear with me a second. We just completed a survey closed at the end of last month, and don't have at a point in time, but we are expecting about 50% of the tenants to be back in the parks on a consolidated basis starting in September.
Okay, and then
One of the challenges for the tenants, they chose to locate in the parks for the collaborative nature that's there, the other tenants. and then working from home or working from a distance, they lost that benefit from it, and it's not just a benefit to those that are there, but it's also a loss to those that are still on site in the park. So I think the collegial nature of the parks is certainly diminishing that part of time. And Mr. Suganen referenced that we hadn't lost tenants during that period of time, but certainly there was a number of tenants weren't physically at work. But at the same period of time, we didn't gain any tenants either. So it was at best holding its own during that period of time. So I think the hope is that as the tenants start to come back to work, they'll be in a better position to sort of assist in marketing, or it'll become more of an attractive spot for other potential tenants that are there. And I know that's something that they'll want to continue to work on.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So you'd mentioned about 50%, hopefully by September. And is there any feel for beyond that point, or is it really too soon to say?
I think it's too soon to say. We are hoping for a steady return to. Of course, we can't predict what's going to happen with the pandemic, but our focus is providing that atmosphere to entice them back, and that's through. We've started the in-person programming events in the parks, with the intention that they'll come back to the parks in the near future.
Okay. Thanks. And then, I guess, in regards to the impact of the pandemic, has there at this point been an impact analysis that's been undertaken? From the perspective of the impact of the pandemic on SoCo as a whole?
We haven't done a separate analysis on that. We do monitor various risks associated with the pandemic. We are monitoring our receivables, for example, which on that topic, we haven't seen a huge impact there. We are, of course, monitoring our programming. As mentioned previously, the vacancy hasn't been impacted a huge amount from that. So again, we're looking at different components, but there hasn't been one specific study done.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm going to turn now to the 2020-2021 annual report. So work from home in 2020 to 2021, in the shift to work from home, were there any costs associated with this in terms of SoCo's perspective?
Not any significant costs. We did have to add some infrastructure to facilitate the work from home. We always had the ability for our employees to work from home remotely, but we did, I guess, update the technology that's used to do that. We also upgraded our park network to accommodate our tenant employees from working from home. When we provide a park network to all of our tenants, or access to a park network for all of our tenants, so we did have to upgrade the bandwidth to accommodate the increased traffic. There was, of course, the increased cleaning that was done in the parks because not all of our tenants work from home. Some maintained occupancy in the parks, and so we increased the cleaning on that. So again, small incremental costs, but nothing material.
And then in regards to the deferred rent option, what is the value of deferred rent, and have most folks caught up?
Yes, that was a program that we offered to the majority of our tenants to defer some of their rent. There was, out of the 122 tenants that were eligible, there was only 9 that took advantage of the program. The dollar amount was approximately $51,000 of rent being deferred, and it has all since been collected.
Great. On page 22, people strategy. have there been external contracts to support this strategy? And if so, what is the cost associated?
There have not. This entire initiative is being done in-house by our own employees.
And can you offer some details around the rewards package?
There's nothing unique that's in it. It's just the part of that program is the balanced approach. So we follow the government guidelines on incentive plans. So there's nothing unique. We do have an executive incentive plan, performance holdback, as part of our total compensation. And then the rest is just regular benefits package, health and dental, those type of things.
Okay. Then on page 21, it says the PTRC has recently rebranded as an energy incubator and accelerator while potential opportunities are being explored in agri-tech and clean tech. I'm wondering if you could provide a bit more information on this rebranding of the PTRC.
Unfortunately, I can't. This is really new. It is something that they've just recently told us about, and we're working with them to understand their program and how we can incorporate it into our parks and have that joint programming. So we're working with them to ensure they've got the right, they're in the right space, and we understand what their objectives are and how we can assist with those.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and are you able to comment at all on the rationale for the rebranding?
I don't know. I assume it is they recognized a need in the market, and then they're filling that need.
Okay.
Member, it was not something that was directed by government or by minister's office. It was something that came from the entity themselves, and naturally we'll work with whatever the needs are of people that are partners or tenants at this. But was not part of any kind of a rebranding initiative undertaken by the province, by the government.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. And then page 23, there's a comment, the departure and downsizing of significant tenants experienced in the last few years and forecasted for the coming year continue to have a negative impact on overall vacancy. I'm wondering if you can please comment on forecasted departure and downsizing for the coming year.
Yes. We've just recently looked at our leasing assumptions, and we entered into this year with a budgeted year-end vacancy of 17%. Based on our current reforecasting of that, we're still at 17%. So we do have tenants that we expect to vacate the park or downsize this year, but we do have a number of tenants, potential tenants, that are looking to expand and enter the parks. So unfortunately, the net will be approximately a 2% increase in vacancy by year end. Okay.
And are you able to comment on which tenants will be vacating?
Unfortunately not. There's two significant tenants, but neither have given official notice, so unable to share the names of those tenants.
Okay, thanks. And do you have a timeline for each of those of vacating?
They're both near the end of the year.
All right, thanks. I'm wondering if you can generally provide an update on the agri-tech sector and any very new developments there since we last spoke in the spring.
for that question. Just to elaborate on some of the comments that the minister provided in his opening remarks, the agri-tech sector continues to be strong. So there's a lot happening. Just for reference, the sector, our tenant base in the sector has grown by 3 in the last couple of years. So that is a sector that's growing. As for there's a lot of exciting things happening. One of the programs that we're very excited to be a part of, and it's been mentioned a few times today, is the Global Agri-Food Partnership, and that's that hybrid incubator. And it's part of the excitement of that is it's a collaboration between a number of entities. So we of course are a key partner providing the infrastructure and programming support, and then it's being led by Ag West Bio. So there's the two also participating is the Global Institute Food Security, the Agri-Food Innovation Center, and various private sector parties. So it's a great example of how the key stakeholders in that sector are coming together for this program. And it's quite exciting because there's a few components to it. Not only is it created to support the early stage companies, it's also here to support the rapid growth stage companies. And that will involve attracting companies from outside of the province, outside of Canada. So they'll bring them here, and then we can really participate in that by supporting while they're here, and hopefully when they graduate from the program, we'll provide that soft landing spot so they can stay in the parks.
Okay. Thanks a lot. And then similarly, an update, if you would, on health and life sciences on that sector.
That is a sector that is less of a focus. The health and life science sector we've only got 9 tenants in that, so it's only just under 6% of our park. So it's not a key sector in our park, but it is one that we hope that will grow. And as you can imagine, with next door with Vito and other entities, we are hoping to grow that sector. But that's not, right now, it's not a prevalent sector in our parks.
Okay, thank you. And just going through really industry services, if you can provide any updates on any new developments there.
Industry services really exist to support the other sectors. So it will increase in our parks. It will increase, it will decrease based on various factors. But again, it's really just so we have the tenants in our parks that support the other sectors.
And continuing to go through with ICT.
Yes, ICT, of course, and that's been mentioned today, is our biggest sector. And it's just for reference purposes, it is 36% of our tenant base is in ICT. And that's where you see a lot of the companies in the incubators being involved in. So again, we've got the incubators here, of course, not in our park in Regina, but we've got CoLabs that operates out of our park in Saskatoon. We talked earlier about the success of those programs, and we're also starting to see the success. So in both parks, even though there's slightly different models being adopted on our involvement with them, we continue to work with Cultivator on joint programming. Of course, same thing in Saskatoon. We also promote and support each other's events. We provide opportunities for certain entities to pilot their technology and leverage the resources. One of the things that we're really working on now is trying to determine what that space is needed for the graduates out of those programs, so we can provide that soft landing spot and then provide the environment to continue to assist those companies in that sector grow and thrive.
Okay, thanks. And then finally, natural resources. You can give an update there.
I'm not sure I have much to add about the natural resources. Again, for context, it is our third biggest cluster sector in our parks. We've got 28 tenants occupying, I don't know the space, but about 19% of the tenant base is in that sector. It is one that has been challenged over the last few years, but we are starting to see it rebound, especially in the areas of clean tech, clean environment on that side.
And where have you seen the largest reductions, I guess, by sector?
In our parks, and this may not be indicative of the sectors in total, but in our parks, I can comment on that. As we've seen reductions in health and life science, again, only, over the last couple of years, it's reduced by 3 tenants, so not a big change. And then the industry services and support, that's reduced by 7 tenants over the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you. And then just turning to the comparison, March 31st, 2020 to March 31st, 2021. Can you comment on the reduction in revenue and what that it was due to?
Yes, the reduction in revenue, there's from last year to this year, there's really 2 main factors, and I guess only 2 factors. One is the impact of the increased vacancy. So we did see the average vacancy rate increase year over year, and that contributed to approximately $1.4 million in reduced revenue. Also contributing to the reduction is the decrease in parking revenue, and that you'll see reflected in the report is our parking revenue decreased about $700,000 year over year, and that was just the result of remote working for employees in the parks.
Okay, thanks. And then about 1.1 million increase in expenses, and if you could give a little bit more detail there.
Yes, so that the $1.1 million increases is mostly due to recoverable building expenses, so the cost for operating the buildings. And as noted in the annual report, the areas where we saw increases were grants of lieu of property taxes, buildings repairs and maintenance, and utility costs. Okay,
thanks. And then I'm just looking at like discontinued operations for 1920. And what did that refer to, that 0.6 million?
That related to in the prior year, we transferred our food services. Prior to last year, we had always operated food services in our Saskatoon park, not through this legal entity, but through it was a not-for-profit that operated the food services, which was controlled by SOCO. In the prior year, the decision was made to outsource that and find a third-party operator to operate those services.
Okay. And can you give us an idea of how that relationship is going? Is that going to be a permanent shift that's seen, or?
That will be a permanent. We do have a long-term agreement in place with Eurist. It's a division of Compass Group. As for how it's going, unfortunately, it's been significantly impacted through the pandemic. They took over in November, and of course, the public restaurant was closed at that time, and they were renovating the cafeteria. The cafeteria opened about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, and they've been closed since. They are in the park offering some pre-ordered, but they haven't been open all the time, and we're looking to have that open next month.
Okay, thanks. I know back in spring I had asked this same question, but wondering if there are any updates since that time around plans in place to address aging infrastructure, particularly in Saskatoon, but also in Regina.
Yes, we have what we call an asset management program, which is a combination of preventative maintenance program to maintain the assets, as well as the capital replacement. So we're continuously looking at our buildings. We're continuously assessing, highlighting areas that need to be addressed, and adjusting either the preventative maintenance program itself or replacing the assets or the component assets as we go.
And then I was just gonna jump back to one of the earlier questions around tenants that are vacating. Have there been reasons provided from the tenants who are vacating? Like what are you being told in terms of why they're moving to a different location?
You know, one of the things we always look at is trends. Are there trends? And from the perspective of, are we providing a product that's needed? And fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, there is no consistent theme. If we look at over the last few years, for example, and you had mentioned that our vacancy went up from 10% in 2016 to 15% now. And if we look at some of the big changes, go back a few years ago, there was a few percent related to Dow AgroSciences. Well, they merged with another company and co-located their operations here to the operations that they merged with. So that accounted for that. Some of the other changes that we've seen here is downsizing, and it's not so much one reason, except for businesses change their business model and their space needs change. So I mean, there isn't one reason that's accounting for the increase in vacancy.
The purpose of the innovation parks is not for long-term tenants. It's an incubator process where it's usually new startups that would be there for a few years, although nobody's put a cap on how long somebody has been there, but usually it's businesses that start there and then grow and expand or move on to a different part of their business model or business life. And I think that's what's taking place with some of the tenants that are going in. And I think all of us, when you see somebody leaving, we always worry about it from a revenue point of view or from the loss of the viability of the park itself and the relationships that exist within that. What has not happened during the pandemic is people haven't been willing to come out and look at expansion or go shopping or spend time looking at physical space. So hopefully the pandemic continues to lift and we'll see more tenant base that's there. But what we haven't seen is the new influx, which I know is something that the parks are working on.
Okay, thanks. And I guess then, understanding what you've just said, some of those vacancies or upcoming vacancies, would those be with long-term, any of those with long-term tenants?
Yes, both of the expected vacancies are long-term tenants.
Okay. And is there any indication that that's in any way associated with, costs to operate in the park?
I don't believe that's a reason in either case.
Okay. And are you able to comment on any particular reasoning for the two upcoming tenants who are vacating?
Unfortunately not, just from the sensitivity of who they are.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that's the extent of my questions today. Really nice to see you again and appreciate your time.
Thank you. Seeing that we've reached our kind of allotted time here, I will now ask a member to move on that we conclude the consideration of the 2018-19, 2019-20, and the 2020-21 annual reports of SOCO. I have Mr. Derek Myers has moved that we conclude the consideration. Is that agreed? Carried. That concludes our business with SOCO. Minister Morgan, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the committee members, thank you for being here and your participation in the process. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the great folks at Ledge Assembly Services, Hansard, Building Security, and the building staff for the work that they do all year round. But today I'd like to specifically thank the staff from and officials from SOCO who are here today. It's easy to say thanks for having showed up, but they work hard every day of the year to try and maintain the business parks, which are part of the innovation and growth of our province. So we thank them for the work that is part of their employment, but also being part of the larger growth picture of our province. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Ms. Bose, do you have any closing comments?
No, I appreciate as well the time you've taken here today to be here and to answer my questions, and thank you so much for that.
Thank you. We will now take a short break and short recess and bring back the officials from South Power. Welcome back. Welcome, Ms. Selena Young. We will be considering the provincial auditors chapters related to SAS Power. For the consideration of the provincial auditors chapters, I will first recognize the provincial auditor, who will proceed to introduce her officials and provide a presentation on the chapters under consideration. Once completed, I will recognize the minister and introduce his officials and respond to the chapters under consideration. After all the auditor's chapters have been reviewed for SAS Power, we will excuse the auditor and move on to consideration of the annual reports. Are there any questions on the process? Seeing none, I will turn it over to Ms. Clement to introduce her officials and make her presentation on the 2019 report, Volume 2, Chapter 45, SAS Power, Managing the Risk of Cyber Incidents.
Thank you, Chair, members, minister, and government officials. With me this morning, I am joined by Carolyn O'Quinn, who is the Deputy Provincial Auditor, whose audit responsibilities include SAS Power, and also Kim Lowe, who is the office's liaison with this committee. Mrs. O'Quinn will present the two chapters in the order noted on the agenda, and only Chapter 23 of our 2020 Report Volume 2 has a new recommendation for this committee's consideration. Before we start, I would like to thank the President and CEO of SAS Power and his staff for the cooperation extended to us during our work. I will now turn it over to Mrs. O'Quinn.
Good morning, everyone. I'll start with the chapter that relates to our follow-up on our audit of SAS Power's processes to manage the risk of cyber incidents. So SAS Power relies significantly on its IT systems to deliver power to its customers and to manage its business, and it is exposed to risk of cyber incidents. Chapter 45 in our 2019 report, Volume 2, which starts on page 327, reports the results of our second follow-up of SAS Power's processes to manage the risk of cyber incidents for the protection of the provision of power. We are pleased to report that by August of 2019, SAS Power implemented the remaining recommendation we had from our work done originally in 2015. SAS Power annually updates its cyber risks assessment and confirms that its strategies address those risks. By confirming that its strategies address significant threats of cyber incidents, SAS Power reduces its risk of a cyber attack jeopardizing its ability to provide power. So I'll now move on to the second chapter under consideration. So this is Chapter 23 of our 2020 report, Volume 2. So in 2019-20, coal-fired electricity generation represented about 31% of SAS Power's total generating capacity. Federal regulations generally require the elimination of the use of conventional coal-fired units by 2030, as coal-fired electricity is a significant source of greenhouse gas emissions. Conventional coal-fired electricity generating units are those that are not equipped with carbon capture and storage technology. In July of 2018, SAS Power announced its decision to not equip two of its coal-fired generating units, which is Boundary Dam Units 4 and 5, with carbon capture and storage technology, which essentially determined the shutdown dates of those units. Those units are expected to be shut down in 2021 and 2024, respectively. SAS Power expects to decommission the entire Boundary Dam site once it shuts down all the units at this location, which will be sometime after 2030. Phasing out coal-fired units and decommissioning related power stations is a very complex and technical process. To do so successfully and safely depends on SAS Power having effective processes to plan. Chapter 23 in our 2020 report, Volume 2, starting on page 103, reports the results of our audit of SAS Power's processes for planning the safe shutdown of coal-fired electricity generating units 4 and 5 and the decommissioning of the power station site at Boundary Dam. We found that SAS Power had effective planning processes other than the matter reported in our one recommendation. On page 200, we recommend SaskPower use the cost estimate classification system adopted by the Saskatchewan Environmental Code to determine the contingency percentage used to estimate costs for decommissioning and reclaiming the Boundary Dam Power Station site. Decommissioning the entire Boundary Dam site will be complex and expensive. In 2019, SaskPower prepared a decommissioning and reclamation plan and submitted it to the Ministry of Environment as required. We found that the content of this plan was consistent with Ministry of Environment guidelines and good practice, other than the following. SaskPower did not have rationale to support the selected contingency percentage in the plan that it used to determine its contingency costs. SaskPower estimated that it would cost approximately $83 million to decommission and reclaim the site, which includes a 20% contingency of $13.8 million. SaskPower indicated that it determined the contingency based on guidance from the Ministry of Environment. The ministry guidance suggests that best practice is to follow the process for cost estimates set out in the Saskatchewan Environmental Code. The code uses a standard classification system to make cost estimates and suggests a contingency range for each class. SaskPower had not set out what cost estimate class it used or the basis it used when it selected the 20% contingency. The consultant who prepared SaskPower's plan told us that the cost estimate is a Class 4 estimate. Our assessment also found that the project had characteristics most consistent with Class 4. 20% contingency is the bottom suggested percentage of the Class 4 range. We found that selecting the lowest percentage of the Class 4 range is inconsistent with the uncertainties related to the project costs at the time we did our audit. Uncertainties still existed in that SaskPower had not yet developed its detailed plans for the decommissioning and not completed certain steps such as its environmental site assessment. Not having completed these steps does increase the likelihood of costs being higher than estimated and therefore could warrant the need for a higher contingency percentage. So not having sufficient rationale for the percentage chosen or following the best practice when suggesting or selecting a contingency percentage increases the risk of SaskPower not reasonably estimating its contingency costs and not having enough resources available at the time of decommissioning of Boundary Dam. That concludes my overview of the SaskPower chapters.
Thank you. Minister Morgan, please introduce your officials and make your comments.
Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to discuss SaskPower's annual reports for 2019-20 and 2020-21 fiscal years, as well as provide updates on provincial auditors' report chapters concerning SaskPower. Today, I'm joined by Mike Marsh, President and CEO, Rochelle Verrett-Morphy, Vice President, Corporate and Regulatory Affairs and General Counsel, Troy King, Vice President, Finance and Business Performance and CFO, Ian Yates, Executive Director, President's Office, Cole Gertz, Communications Director, and my Chief of Staff, Jared Dunlop. Mr. Chair, the 2019-2020 SaskPower net income was $205 million with a return on equity of 7.8%. This net income was up $8 million compared to 2018-19. SaskPower invested $696 million in our province's electricity system in 2019-20, including $374 million for capital sustainment, which includes upgrades to aging generation, transmission and distribution infrastructure, which are the key phases power goes through before reaching customers. The company also spent $253 million on capital projects related to growth and compliance. This investment includes $156 million to connect new customers. SaskPower celebrated many achievements throughout 2019-20, including commissioning of the Chinook Power Station, a 353-megawatt natural gas-fired station built near Swift Current, on time and under budget. Completing the Pasqua to Swift Current transmission line, a $185 million project that stretches 200 kilometers and helps to deliver power from Chinook to customers. And achieving the Canadian Electricity Association's Sustainable Electricity Company designation, which recognizes SaskPower's commitment to social responsibility and sustainable development. Only 9 Canadian utilities have achieved this designation to date. SaskPower also continues to make progress towards its emissions reduction targets through achievements such as the opening of a competitive solicitation awarded 200 megawatts to Renewable Energy Systems Canada and Cowess's first generation for wind-generated power to be developed and operational by the end of 2023. The announcement of the RFP phase for the next 10-megawatt utility-scale solar project, which has since been awarded and will be located in Regina. The announcement of a 25-year power purchase agreement with Meadow Lake Tribal Council for up to 8 megawatts of biomass-generated electricity. In 2019-20, SaskPower provided nearly $1.7 million in funding to communities and organizations that keep our province vibrant, and directed $3 million to post-secondary education, focusing on student development and research aligned with the company's workforce and operational priorities. This is just a small sample of the work SaskPower undertook during the 2019-20 year. I'd like to move on and talk about the 2020-21 annual report. The COVID-19 pandemic affected all of our lives during the past year and a half, and the 2020-21 fiscal year was unlike any other in the history of SaskPower. The pandemic constrained the economy and changed consumption patterns, ultimately contributing to a 3% reduction in the amount of power used in the province. This, combined with higher fuel costs and capital-related expenses, resulted in a net income of $160 million in 2020-21, down $45 million compared to 2019-20. Despite these challenges, SaskPower has strong financial and operational performance in 2020-21. SaskPower invested $693 million in the province's electrical system, $366 million of which was spent on sustainment activities. SaskPower also spent $286 million on growth and compliance investments. Significantly, SaskPower is now on track to reduce greenhouse emissions by at least 50% from the 2005 levels by the year 2030. This exceeds the previous goal of 40%, which was set in 2015. This demonstrates that the investments SaskPower is making in emissions reduction have been successful and puts the company in a strong position as it targets net zero emissions by 2050. Some of SaskPower's other major highlights from 2020-21 include waiving interest on outstanding bills for 6 months to help customers struggling financially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and beginning construction of the Great Plains Power Station in Moose Jaw, signing on to the Government of Canada's Small Modular Reactor Action Plan, and announcing the development of the 10-megawatt Foxtail Grove Solar Energy Facility in Regina, and signing power purchase agreements for 2 more 10-megawatt solar projects brought forward by the First Nations Power Authority, and once again being named as one of Canada's best diversity employers, top employers for young people, and one of Saskatchewan's top employers. I'd like to thank Mike Marsh and all SaskPower employees for their hard work and accomplishments during the past 2 years, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to discuss consideration of the Provincial Auditor's Report chapters. Chapter 23, Audit of SaskPower's Planning Process to Shut Down Boundary Dam Power Station Unit 4 and 5. Regarding the Chapter 23 recommendations, in 2018, SaskPower announced the decision to permanently shut down Boundary Dam Power Station Unit 4 and 5 in 2021 and 2024, respectively. Shutting down these units will involve placing them in a safe state where they are disconnected and physically separated from electrical and natural gas supplies. Fully decommissioning will be complete after all Boundary Dam Power Station units are shut down. I'd like to thank the Provincial Auditor and her office for the review of processes. SaskPower was pleased that the Auditor found SaskPower had effective processes for planning the safe shutdown of Boundary Dam Units 4 and 5. The Provincial Auditor had one recommendation regarding Power's process for determining decommissioning costs and contingency percentages in SAS Power's Boundary Dam decommissioning plan. In response to this finding, SAS Power has refined its process for determining contingency estimates, and this change will be implemented in all future decommissioning plans to fully align with the provincial auditor's recommendation. Chapter 45, Managing the Risks of Cyber Incidents at SAS Power. Regarding the Chapter 45, Managing the Risk of Cyber Incidents recommendations, SAS Power is a Crown corporation in the critical infrastructure sector and extensively utilizes cybersecurity-focused people, processes, and technology to protect the organization's infrastructure from attacks. I'd like to thank the provincial auditor and her office for the review of the processes. SAS Power has implemented all 3 recommendations, and this work has been validated by the provincial auditor. For recommendation number 1, documenting cyber threats, SAS Power has put corporate as well as divisional risk registers in place that include an assessment of the likelihood and impact of cyber risks for assets critical to providing power, such as operational technology systems for power plants and grid control. For recommendation number 2, cyber risk mitigation strategies, SAS Power has developed cyber risk mitigation strategies that address the significant threats of cyber incidents that could affect its ability to provide power. For recommendation number 3, adequate guidance provided for identifying cyber incidents, SAS Power continues to provide cybersecurity training for its employees that outlines examples of cybersecurity incidents. Incident management procedures were updated to include cyber incidents and the incident response plan. With that, Mr. Chair, we are happy to answer any questions that the committee may have on any of these items.
Thank you, Minister. Do any members have any questions on the provincial auditor's report, Chapter 45 and 23? I recognize Ms. Elena Young.
Thank you, Mr. Dennis. Thank you, officials and Minister and fellow committee members for being here today. And before we begin, I want to just recognize the pretty intense storm that happened in the province last night. And I hope those of you in from outside Regina, I hope all your communities are doing okay, as well as the people who live there and all the people hard at work to repair some of the damage that the province saw last night. With that, I would like to begin with questions on Chapter 45 for the Provincial Auditor's Report. Is there an example that can be given of a cyber attack that an organization like SAS Power could feasibly occur in an organization like SAS Power?
Sure. Good morning. A typical example, well, first of all, let me say that cyber attacks and hacking have become a standard way of life for all utilities. We get, like every other utility, we get attacked on our systems every day, and we have defense in depth to mitigate those situations. A typical attack might be on a device, for example, that is connected to the network. And that's why most utilities have separated their operational control systems from their information control systems and put in firewalls and defense in depth. Those attacks will continue as long as there's an access into a company's systems. There are hackers out there looking to find a way in. And they're looking for that way to put something into our system that may come to life weeks or months down the road. And we work, our IT teams at SAS Power work with other IT agencies in the province. They work with the industry across Canada as well. We get briefings regularly from the various cybersecurity branches in the federal government, and we are updated very soon after there's a breach in another utility's infrastructure across Canada. So our defenses are in place.
You might want to mention the Eastern Seaboard where they had the rents.
In the past year, there's been a couple of incidents where cyber attacks result in a ransomware attack. In other words, the company is asked to pay up, or they will release this malware into the system, which can cause very destructive things. It's happened in a couple of utilities. That happened in the pipeline company down east last year. And that particular issue resulted in the company paying some money to prevent further damage. And this is becoming a regular occurrence. It has not yet happened to SAS Power, but we're preparing for that just like every other major corporation going forward. Just as an example of the number of times we're getting hit, in 2020, we had over 300,000 blocked internet attacks. So 1,000 a day. That's what's happening. Over 500 workstation malware attack attempts. So where hackers attempt to put malware on workstations across the organization. So that just gives you a sense of how this is ramping up in the utility sector, because we do manage critical infrastructure here in the province, and other utilities across Canada are developing defense in-depth strategies as well.
And are we relatively consistent with other power utilities in Canada in terms of the quantity and severity of the attacks that you mentioned and the steps that are being taken to mitigate those?
I would say we're on par. I think there's some utilities that are being attacked more frequently, especially utilities in the east that are connected into a wider network. There's more access points, I think, but I think generally the utility is moving in step. We fall under what's called cyber and critical infrastructure protection rules from NERC in the United States. In order to be connected to our neighbors across Canada, all jurisdictions have to comply with NERC standards, and we comply with those standards, and those standards are constantly changing year over year. And keeping up with the technology is something that our team does and works on every day.
And you mentioned, I guess, the distinction between operational and information systems within power. Is one of these more likely to be targeted, or is one of these, does operational or information systems have a higher severity? You know, when I think of, as a layperson, operations, I think somebody, bad actor hacks in and there's no power. Or, whereas I think of information, I think somehow, the data and the private information that power would have on behalf of their customers and partners is held hostage or released. Is that accurate?
That's an accurate assessment. Release of private information, customer information, of course, is a concern for all utilities on the information side. And accessing parts of the grid where they can either block or stop energy flow in certain parts of the province would be a great concern. So that's why we have defenses set up.
And is the management of this risk and the mitigation of it, does it differ within SAS Power proper compared to some of the independent power producers that SAS Power would have agreements with? Or is that risk mitigated and managed holistically across the entire utility?
It's managed across the entire province through the structures we've set up. So any utility that's producing power and supplying power to us has to comply with those same standards at their sites. So there's protection and control systems put in place at the generating stations, on the transmission grid, and where the transmission grid is connected with its neighbors, east, west, and south.
And I imagine SAS Power undertakes like regular audits or routine checks of all of those things with the independent power producers and other
Our teams are in daily, weekly, monthly communication on all of these things. If there's an issue that has arisen, we would communicate that with our IPP partners out there. If there's new instruction or directions coming, that would be communicated to them as well.
Thank you. My last question on Chapter 45. I understand there's been some broader discussion in insurance markets around the feasibility of insuring against cyber risk, and I'm wondering if this is feasible for SaskPower, or if there have been any conversations along those lines to protect against those risks.
I think I'll ask Troy King, our CFO, to step up and answer that one.
Troy King, CFO of SaskPower. No, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. That is an area of conversation. Right now, SaskPower does have insurance in place in the event of a cyber attack to help mitigate some of the expenses that may result, including potential ransomware. However, I think what you're kind of targeting is there is discussion of broader whether that insurance will continue, whether it'll be. I know a number of jurisdictions are suggesting that they don't want insurance in place because they don't want them paying these type of factors. But at this point in time, SaskPower has been able to secure insurance.
Thank you, Mr. King. No further questions on Chapter 45, Mr. Chair.
3? Yeah.
Okay, great. Perfect. Pardon me, I wasn't sure if we had to move one first. All right, chapter 23. I guess to kick off, could the committee be reminded of what percentage of power generation Boundary Dam writ large represents for Saskatchewan?
Right now, Boundary Dam produces, I'm just doing the math in my head, about 720 to 750 megawatts out of 4,500 megawatts nominal.
Thank you. And does that, and I'm sure the numbers are in here somewhere, but I didn't do the math either. Is that even roughly speaking, what percentage of the coal-fired capacity is that for SaskPower?
Well, we have 3 other stations in the province that produce the remaining 900 megawatts. So it's just almost half, a little less than half of the capacity. Yeah.
Okay. A few questions generally related to decommissioning processes. The report notes on page 183 that the suggested contingency range is between 20 to 50%, which is a significant range. And the report noted that Power estimated about 13.8 million, but it could be anywhere up to, I believe, is about 34.5 million, which is a significant variance. With the update that was provided by the auditors, has that further contingency been incorporated into planning?
Again, I'll refer to Mr. King to answer that question.
So thank you. So yes, SaskPower is continuing to update all of its decommissioning estimates. So the audit report looks specifically at units 4 and 5 because they're coming to the end of their life. But our decommissioning provision actually encompasses all of our coal plants at Boundary Dam, at Shan, at Cornac, as well as our gas plants, our wind facilities. So all of our generation fits under the decommissioning umbrella. So what we do is we have a plan and we look at our decommissioning estimates annually. And once every 5 years, or I guess I should say on an annual basis, we're bringing in an external consultant to review our estimates. And we don't look at 100% of the units, but we'll do them the plan is to have them reviewed every 5 years we'll have an external review done. So that's all in the process. Just for your knowledge, right now we have about $257 million set up for decommissioning, and we grow that each and every year as the plants are operating. The end number is around $450 million for all of our plants, and that's constantly updated and changed year to year.
Thank you, Mr. King. So the total project cost for Boundary Dam, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. The costs discussed within the report are specific to units 4 and 5, which is within that range that was discussed. And then the total project cost for Boundary Dam overall, do you have that number?
No, I don't have the total for Boundary Dam specifically. However, I guess I can give you some updates on the 4 and 5 specifically. So when 4 and 5 retire, 4 is scheduled for the end of this year, 5 in 2024. We won't decommission them at that time because the other units are still operating. So there will be some layup costs, roughly $500,000 to lay up each one of those to safely sort of put them in a state that they won't hurt anything or damage any other facilities. The final decommissioning date will be when the last unit is retired. So right now we have that set around the mid-2040s for the full decommissioning of the facility.
And what is I understand, I think I remember, at one point I had this written down, that the federal equivalency agreement, I believe, goes until 2029 now. It's been, okay, so it was under negotiations, but it has been re-signed. Okay. Excellent. So equivalency agreements, are those typically 5 years just by virtue, or is that term negotiated specifically?
No, ours is to 2029, and there are certain targets that we have to meet within those dates in terms of emissions in order to continue to be eligible for it.
And it's very likely I don't fully understand the scope of these agreements, but what impact will I'm not sure what the right language is. I'm going to continue to say decommissioning unless you give me another suggestion, but the decommissioning of units 4 and 5, taking them offline and basically putting them into that slumber state, I suppose, until the full decommissioning of the power facility. Does the offlining of units 4 and 5 have an impact on SaskPower's standing with the entire fleet in the context of those agreements?
Well, this is part of the equivalency agreement and part of the agreement between the province and the federal government when that agreement was signed. These units would retire at the end of their natural life, if you will, their design life. That was part of the process in order to meet the targets that have been established in the periods that Troy has indicated. Those units come off. We replace that energy with energy from natural gas generation or from renewable energy. That's why our emissions continue to fall. This is a part of the natural cycle as you decommission over the next 8 years to the end of 2029.
It doesn't, for example, extend the tail of the agreements, as more coal units come offline. It doesn't potentially give a longer lifespan for those.
What it just simply allows if we can generate more energy from cleaner sources like natural gas or renewables, we get a credit for that in that period. So that we can carry that over into the next period, which allows us to be a little more flexible on how we use our units. We have very cold winters here. Sometimes we need to run our gas units or our coal units longer. And as we transition, we're going to have to probably run some of our other fossil energy units for those peak periods. And this summer, for example, with the high heat periods, we had high air conditioning loads across the province. We needed all the generation we could run. And so that's the impact over time, and that's the importance of developing a good supply plan going forward.
Has there been any impact on decisions around the remaining coal fleet related to the federal budget and some of the CCS and CCUS announcements?
No, we continue to look at all the options that are available to us as these units roll off. The last 3 units are the Poplar River Unit 1 and 2, which are 300 megawatts each, and the Shand unit, and they retire in 2029. So we're still evaluating the options and the best option for replacement for those units.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. So at the writing of this report, which I believe was September 2020, there hadn't been decisions made as to whether Shand or Poplar Unit 6 would be equipped with CCS or CCUS. Not sure which you'd prefer to use technology. Have those decisions been made?
No.
No.
Decisions have not yet been made, and they will be made, at the point in time that we come forward with a decision item. Generation decisions ultimately need cabinet approval, and so that will be the governance process that we follow.
I can advise the member that carbon capture and storage is important to the province and is an option that we need to consider what we do, how we do it, and imperative as part of that is having the necessary support from the federal government to do it. Minister Kading and I have had Zoom calls with Federal Minister Wilkinson to discuss where we would go further and to seek their support for carbon capture and storage going forward, and what we would do with regard to the usage of the stored CO2, whether it would go into a pipeline to be used elsewhere, whether it would go into the Aquastore facility, or what the options might be, and what the tax credits might look like going forward. We invited him to come to the facility and tour it. I haven't gone there myself, and it's on my list of things to do, and would be glad to do a joint tour with Federal Minister Wilkinson so we could go through, have a look at it, and see what the plant is like, and specifically see what the options are for the communities that are around there. Conventional coal certainly has its challenge, but we do have a 300-year supply of lignite that's at that area, and at this point a viable coal industry that if we can find a way to use that in compliance with the federal targets and meet the emissions targets, we certainly want to explore every possibility to try and do that, and part of that will depend on the support that we get from the federal government, and look forward to continuing those discussions with Minister Wilkinson or whoever the minister might be following the next election, Minister Poilievre, or whoever it may happen to be. Your guess would be as good as mine. Maybe Minister Singh would take the file himself. I don't know.
That would be Prime Minister Singh, Mr. Morgan.
Chooses to keep the file for himself, I would look forward to having the discussion with him.
Thank you. Would you be willing to hazard a characterization of how those discussions have proceeded thus far, recognizing, the timing of the election?
Sure. The discussions have taken place over a number of occasions, and I think Minister Kading has had more discussions than I have. The discussions were certainly cordial. Minister Wilkinson is from Saskatoon, as am I. Went to a school not nearly as good as mine, but I forgive him for that. And so the discussions were cordial, and we talked about the options and opportunities that were there, and made the invitation that he should go there, have a look at it himself, and that. But as is quite proper, he speaks for his government and for the Prime Minister, who does not have a lot of flexibility in this regard right now, and is limited in what his options are, and is very direct on us continuing to meet the targets. Fortunately for us, we've had good success with Sask Power working hard to meet the targets. They're ahead of where they need to be for the 2029 targets. The target was a 40% reduction. They will be by 2029 at a 50% reduction, but the challenge will be between 2029 and 2050 as some of the older parts of the fleet come offline and where we go. One of the discussions that we raised with him and don't have a definitive answer is where we go with small modular reactors and with nuclear power. Nuclear power is one of our best options for meeting the emissions requirements, and we're watching carefully, very carefully, what's taking place in Ontario with the replacement of the Darlington plant, and looking forward to seeing how that's going to play itself out, and not waiting until, in fact, that's complete, but sort of wanting to be one step behind them and taking careful steps. We're a small province. We're 3% of the nation's population, so as we go forward with that process, we can't afford to build or develop an SMR ourselves, so we have to look at either a process that's done or follow somebody else that's spending the capital on development processes. So we're watching with some significant interest, and would certainly want to ask all members of the legislature to be fully supportive of those discussions, and to urge their federal counterparts to be similarly supportive. And there has not been a lot of discussion on nuclear in the last while, but in our province, we have a relatively high degree of support from the population at large. We've got a significant portion of the world's uranium in our province, so it's certainly a small modular reactor would fit well within our grid, and possibly we should look at having them at several points in the grid. As you're aware, the more you build of those things, the greater the efficiencies that are there. So I apologize for having gone on so long, but you raised the issue about where we go as those other facilities come offline. So the simple answer, we want to work with the feds first to identify what we can for carbon capture and storage, for what we can do with coal production and coal usage, and secondly, the other options with regard to SMRs. I might add that we have not taken any method of electrical generation off the line, whether it be biomass, wind, solar, and over time, as technologies develop, some of the things that we thought at one time might not be particularly viable are turning out to be better than what we thought or hoped for. In particular, wind has become more affordable and manageable, and we now see that solar panels are becoming much cheaper than they were before. The unfortunate thing that has not yet happened from a technology point of view is a good method of battery storage, and as you're aware, they're lithium, and it's a limited resource. So anyway, those are all things that can and must be considered as we go forward.
Thank you, Minister. I very much appreciated the answer. And as you know, power generation sources isn't something that necessarily always cuts cleanly across party lines in this province currently, or in the glorious history of Saskatchewan and the Saskatchewan Power Corporation. So I do look forward to hearing more about those discussions in the future, and what can be done for Sask Power, and ultimately for clean, affordable, sustainable power within the province of Saskatchewan. So, circling back, the decommissioning planning is, when we speak about that broadly, that's the decommissioning in the mid-2040s. This was cited of the power generation site, like that big iconic building just outside of Estevan, correct? Okay, great. And I just want to make sure my understanding is accurate, that as units 4, 5, and 6 are eventually rolled offline, the anchor will be unit 3 and the CCS unit. And is Shand related to that? Shand can operate fully independently of Boundary Dam. Okay, correct.
Fully separate from Boundary.
Do the economics start to change as for the operations of Unit 3 and Shand as 4, 5, and 6 go offline, whether there's an impact on, not even going to pretend to be an expert on the coal contracts or on skilled workforce, or even the resources necessary to keep just Unit 3 operating in that big, beautiful building down there?
No, that's a good question. Of course, as time goes on and you near the end of the life of a facility, issues like coal contracts and how the coal contracts are structured, if we're taking less coal out of the mines from the mining company, then there's more of a fixed cost portion of the contract that still has to be paid for equipment and facilities and the like. So yes, the unit costs do start to go up on the coal side. For a plant like Boundary Dam, when there's lots of common systems, so we have a water treatment plant there. You have what we call an unfiltered water system, which is used for taking the coal slurry out the bottom of the boilers and taking it to the ash lagoons. There's common electrical systems across the plant. That plant would continue to be needed, would need to be heated through the winter time. So we have to provide heating lines and that sort of thing. So yes, the unit costs start to rise as you drop off units and those costs get picked up by the remaining units of production. That's just the way it works.
I believe SAS Power has a committee, I think, transition to 2030. Which was cited in the report as a part of this planning for decommissioning. I'm wondering if you can speak to the membership of the committee. Is it only SAS Power executives? Are there external members? What does that committee look like, and how often do they meet?
The transition to 2030 committee is really an internal committee of the company across all the divisions of the company. That are looking at all aspects of decommissioning, not just the plants, not just the physical structures that we have in place, but the workforce and how the workforce is going to be affected. And of course, if the workforce is affected, how are the communities affected? And those members of that group have had regular conversations with the community of Estevan and the community of Coronach, and we'll continue to do so as we operate those facilities.
So are there public-facing products then that have been produced by the committee or associated sponsors or members to speak to those communities? No.
No. We provide presentations to those communities and we talk to them at their request when they want to have a conversation. We're there.
And I believe the estimate that SAS Power had at the time of the reporting of this report. When this report was written, estimated that unfortunately the phase out of coal-fired electricity generation could negatively impact around, I believe it was 1,300 jobs across, Saskatchewan coal-producing communities. Do those numbers remain static? Are those the same numbers that SAS Power is looking at today?
I don't have those numbers in front of me. Troy, do you have about the same? Okay, and that includes not only direct employed SAS Power people, but the people that are employed in the mine through Westmoreland Coal and other indirect jobs that have been identified in those communities.
That was going to be my next question in terms of, there's about, 50 jobs at 4 and 5 specifically, and then the remaining would be across mining or contractors or associated.
Yeah.
Okay. I do note that as per the report, the committee's written a strategy for communicating with those impacted communities, maintaining positive working relationships and, demonstrating a commitment to those communities which have built so much of their lives around the presence of their power generation. Is that a document that's available currently, public-facing?
I don't believe so, unless the community is sharing it. I don't think we have. This is something that we've been working with these communities. We respect their requests, and there's lots of things being discussed that are probably not ready for prime time yet. But
I can't ask for it to be tabled then, I assume. Okay, I'm getting a no from the chair. I hope you're right. Otherwise, I'll just ask next year. One of the risks identified by SAS Powers is obviously that as this proceeds, skilled and qualified personnel are going to be leaving certainly the communities and the companies or the company, which I imagine adds to risks in terms of operating these units safely and maintaining a skilled and qualified workforce. Is this occurring? And if it is it predominantly retirements or are they departures as folks unfortunately don't see a future where they currently are?
well, there's two things happening. There's certainly the impact on the communities and the potential removal of jobs from those communities as these units retire. That's number one. But I think even before these the retirements were announced, we started to see a shift in the expectations of the working or the folks that are working in those power stations. So people are more reluctant to move to a remote location, just basically, whether they were retiring or not. People would rather work in a big city. So the ability to attract has become more difficult in the last 10, 15 years, not just in the last 2. So that's, and we have many of our operating staff who go down and they'll work for 3 shifts, like 3 12-hour shifts. They live in Regina or Moose Jaw or surrounding communities, Assiniboia, and they'll go to the plants, they'll do their shift, and then they'll go back to their community. When those plants were built, most of the folks moved into those areas, but over time, we're finding the workforce wants to live in the bigger centers, and that's just a natural, I think, evolution. When these plants retire, there's going to be lots of work and lots of discussion with those communities as we get closer to those retirement dates, and about what that exactly means and when. For BD4, there's going to be no impact. Those employees will be absorbed into our workforce, and they'll be able to bid on jobs and move to other locations. We're expecting very minimal impact there. BD5 will have a slightly bigger impact on the organization, but again, we're not looking at any layoffs for the BD4 and BD5 retirements. But once we start to roll off the larger units, of course, there's going to be a bigger impact to the rest of the workforce. So that's that work is underway. There's many paths that can be taken, but we're going to continue to work with the workforce and with the communities as we figure out the best path.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Is decommissioning work on Unit 4 then currently underway?
No.
No.
No, there's no decommissioning work per se. As Troy said, we're going to lay it up, and that means the boiler, all the piping has to be either drained or we have to add chemicals to make sure it's protected in case we do need to run it or do something with it down the road. But you can't take that structure apart because it's an integral. It's between Unit 3 and Unit 5, so you can't remove it.
Enough work, I guess, underway.
No, not yet. That unit's still operating.
It's still operating.
Yes, and we intend to operate it right as close to the end of the year as we can.
So it will continue to operate up until, is it December 2022 or?
If there's an opportunity to take it down weeks earlier, we're going to do that. If it's a safe thing to do, we'll look at the best time to do that layup operation. You don't want to do it when it's 40 below, if you can help it. You'd like to do it when you at least experience some warm weather, because there's lots of work that will have to be done to some of the outside structures and facilities there as well.
Okay, so just to make sure I fully wrap my head around this, it'll essentially continue to operate in use up until a time when it's
down.
Yeah, time to shut it down with the hard stop of the end of 2022.
2021, this year.
2021,
December.
pardon
Yeah,
me.
the
Yes.
end of this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so lots of planning, I imagine, underway. Where am I going next? I understand SaskPower has submitted a decommissioning and reclamation plan to the Ministry of Environment related to all of this work, and that this work was completed with an external consultant. What was the cost of that contract with the external consultant for that report? Sorry, Mr. King.
Number.
Perfect. And if I ask any relevant questions or even irrelevant ones, and you can get me the information later, I would appreciate it. So I imagine that contract is complete as the report has been submitted. Is there an anticipation of renewing contracts with external consultants as this plan comes to its? I think it has an end of life. It needs renewal in 2024, I believe.
You know, I'm sorry, I don't have any information on specifics around contracts with consultants. I can't answer that, and I don't think Troy or Rochelle can either.
It's okay. I will move on. In regards to the ash lagoons, as per the auditor's report, I think it notes that decommissioning ash lagoons can take up to 15 years, which is a fairly significant tail. So am I correct in assuming that that is the last stage in the full decommissioning of the power station?
That is correct. Once the plant shuts down, I mean, at the last day the plant is operating, you still need to move that ash out to the ash lagoon. But over time, the process would be the ash lagoons would be drained. So you imagine they're ash, but there's a layer of water, surface water on there. That water would either evaporate or be drained. And the final result would be to level it and then put topsoil on it in accordance with the Ministry of Environment's guidelines on that.
Great. And is it SaskPower who will then be doing the monitoring for that, or is it the Ministry of Environment?
I believe it would be the Ministry of Environment. We'd have our own consultant, or we'd have our own environmental people engaged. And this would probably take many years after the power station is finally closed down. So the final remediation of these sites is not going to happen in a month or two. This is going to take several years, and the bigger plants will take longer. Understood.
I'm not clear when this would occur in the timing, but has an environmental site assessment happened yet for those ash lagoons?
I don't believe so, but we could check on that. I don't believe so.
Been there for years since the plant's been in operation, so that any site assessment would have been done at the time they were initially constructed, and presumably they would have been in compliance at that point in time. So my understanding is the plants will run, the lagoons will continue to operate until the plant goes offline, and then it goes into reclamation or wind down process. And I'm not sure whether they would do a site assessment, because usually a site assessment is done in the context of building something new. But I'm sure that the reclamation process, which has been submitted and I understand approved by Ministry of the Environment, will have plans for the number of years for who does the inspections on what date and what the process is until the process is finalized.
Thank you. I have just a couple questions left on this chapter. As units 4, 5, and 6 eventually move offline at Boundary Dam, and it's unit 3 up and operating, is the inevitable, sorry, remind me, what am I supposed to say instead of decommissioning, offlining? Shut down.
Shut down.
Shut down, thank you, of units 4, 5, and 6. Is there any anticipation that this will have an impact on contracts for the sale of CO2 out of Unit 3.
So it's BD3 again is a separate unit of generation, and all the CO2 that's produced comes off BD3. So the retirement of the other units is not going to affect that facility.
And can you remind the committee, when is the initial contract? Was it a 10-year contract with Synovus?
It expires in end of 2024.
If this contract isn't renewed, what impact would there be on the decommissioning of the site? Where obviously there would be an economic impact on SAS Power regarded to the sale of that CO2, but would there be a need to drill a new storage well?
That's one option. There may be another off-taker available if the contract isn't renewed with the present off-taker. Another storage well, another use for that. It could be trucked away from the facility and instead of put it into the pipeline. So there's many options we would look at before we would, and it wouldn't affect the decommissioning of the plant at that time. It would. That's for kind of a future date when the decision to actually retire BD3 would happen. And then we'd have to look at the cost to decommission not only the BD3 generating station, but the carbon capture facility.
Yeah, my kind of line of thought was, if, unfortunately that contract wasn't renewed, then the economics become, as was noted earlier, the economics become more challenging, obviously, as units are taken off. I shouldn't say challenging, but they change as units are taken offline. And
we've stated publicly previously the sale of CO2 was for enhanced oil recovery was a part of this whole process, and certainly helped the economics of BD3.
Thank you. One final question. I noticed in the budget for the broader process for Boundary Dam, there's I think $100,000 being spent for public engagement. Is this kind of just like open houses and that work that is ongoing with the community?
Sorry, this was for which unit? Did you say BD3? Or
for the broader shutdown and decommissioning of Boundary Dam.
Yeah. We have, as again, part of our engagement with the communities, we've committed to funding planning and work the communities want to undertake to the tune of $100,000 for each community over the next 3 years, over a 3-year period. I think last year, this year, and next year, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I think that was the plan. And then we'll look at what the future brings and what, how we need to engage the communities and how we need to continue to support them on this journey. We've never shut down plants like this before, and we've never seen what we're going to see here with the closure of conventional coal facilities, and we all have to work together to make this happen.
Hear, hear. No further questions on Chapter 45 or any of the auditor's reports, Mr. Chair.
Xiang. The 2019 report, Volume 2, Chapter 45, has no new recommendations for the committee to consider. I'll ask a member to move that we conclude the consideration of this chapter. Mr. Darrell Harrison has moved that we conclude the consideration of the 2019 report, Volume 2, Chapter 45. Is that agreed? Carried. We'll move on to the 2020 report, Volume 2, Chapter 23, has one new recommendation for the committee to consider. What is the wish of the committee? I recognize Mr. Dana Scorpad.
Chair, I move that the committee concur with the recommendation and note progress towards compliance.
Mr. Scorpad has moved that the committee concur with the recommendation and note progress towards compliance. That concludes our business for the provincial auditor this morning. You're excused, and we'll see you this afternoon. We'll now move on to the consideration of the 2019-2020 annual reports of SAS Power and its subsidiaries that include the 2019-20 and 2021 SAS Power reports, and 19-20 and 2021 North Point Energy Solutions, Inc. financial statements, and the 2019-20 Power Corporation Superannuation Plan annual report. And we'll move on to questions there. I recognize Ms. Selena Young.
Mr. Chair, suppose we take a brief break, resuming at 10:15.
Sure. You okay with that? Okay, we will take a short break and be back here at 10:15 to resume. like to welcome everybody back after a short recess, and we'll go straight to questions from Ms. Elena Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given we're looking at 2 years worth of annual reports, what I will endeavor to do is try and ask questions generally related to both reports, although I will do my best if I have questions specific to 1 year to identify those at the start. But again, I will do my best. No promises on how successful I'll be. So please, if I'm unclear, just let me know, as there's a great deal of information to wade through for these 2 years. To start, a few general questions for the corporation. For the utility, what is the total number of employees that SaskPower has right now? And is this the most employees that Power's ever had?
3,200 permanent employees right now. We have part-time and temporary employees that would bring that up to probably 38. And a temporary employee would be somebody that is hired to work at a Boundary Dam power station, for example, during an overhaul. So they might come in and work 3 weeks and then get hired for another 3 weeks. So they might work just a few weeks out of the year. And there might be 60 of them that get hired for those periods of time. So those total up to, 10 or 12 full-time equivalents. So about 3,800 when you include part-time and temporary. Is it the most? Yes. I'd have to back up. No, we had slightly higher than that a few years ago, probably in the 2013-14 when we were building BD3. And prior to the downturn in the oil sector, we took action at the company to hold off on hiring and to actually begin to reduce our FTE count gradually over time through attrition. So I think we were slightly higher than that previously, but very close.
And the current power generation, would it be the most we've ever had in terms of capacity?
Power generation has never gone down. It's, since the power company was established in 1929, growth in the province has continued to increase the demand for electricity. So we continue to add supply. We continue to build out the grid and the network in the province, and we continue to grow, and we look for further growth in the future, especially when you look at electrification in the economy over the next 20, 30 years.
And sorry, Mr. Marsh, what do you mean by that?
Electrification means the other sectors, the transportation sector, the agriculture sector, the industrial sector, will be converting from fossil energy to electricity in most cases. Home heating, for example, would also be affected at some point going forward. So,
interesting future ahead, which is, I suppose, an evergreen statement. I noted in this year's annual report there was some great infographics celebrating many of the new projects that are coming online, many of which are renewable, which is obviously a positive. How many independent power producers does SaskPower currently contract with?
I don't know the exact number, but just a little over 20% of our capacity is provided by independent power producers in the province, and that will grow with the addition of the 2 new wind sites that are coming on stream this year. Yeah, in the annual report on page 119, it is identified with an asterisk on which one is an independent power producer.
And that map is comprehensive?
Everything that we have today.
Okay, excellent, thank you. What is the longest running contract with an independent power producer that the utility has, whether novel or renewed?
Sunbridge, maybe.
Longest in
Do you mean the longest term, or which one currently in place have we had the longest?
The latter.
Okay. Well, we entered into a power purchase agreement with Sunbridge, which is a joint venture between Enbridge and Suncor back in the early 2000s for a small wind facility in Saskatchewan. I think that was for a 25-year. Yeah, and then Meridian at the Husky upgrader is another one that we entered into in the early 2000s.
And so prior to that, all of the generation would have been in-house effectively.
Yeah.
Thank you. On page 2, I believe, of both reports, there is a notable decrease in capital expenditures. I'm wondering if you could speak to that decrease.
Answer any questions.
Into 2019-20? Yeah, it's what will what you'll see what's a big driver in our capital expenditures, if you look from year to year, it's usually new generation that will drive it to spike up, and then subsequently, once it's completed, to fall. So Chinook Power Station would have been what was driving it, and once it was complete, you would see the capital fall off. And now as we start building Moose Jaw facility, the Great Plains facility, you'll start seeing our capital ramping up again this year.
One other question about a graph to help me understand it. On page 3 of the 2020-2021 annual report, I believe it's within 1920 as well. I think they're SaskPower is actually quite consistent in how they present their annual reports, which my full appreciation of it makes for great reading, especially when you're doing it kind of concordantly. So on page 3, there is a graph that lays out Saskatchewan electricity sales, and I'm just looking for some assistance in understanding how the sales are going up by dollar value, but down by gigawatt hour. So is that power being sold more expensive?
The difference is the carbon tax. So our power is more expensive because we've had to continue to add in for the carbon tax. So even though the volumes have come down, since the carbon tax has come into place, we have about, it's almost 6% that we've had to add is what the carbon tax equates to.
And so how do I understand, just trying to make sure I'm asking relatively coherent questions, how do I understand the volatility in that graph then from, 2016 to then it's close to parity at 2018, 2019, and then the gap widens again as we move closer to the present? Yeah.
The orange bars there?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the orange bars are showing the revenue in terms of dollars. And so it could be, a rate increase could drive it, or it can be volumetric will drive it up. So as it's moving up, you can see the jump from 16, 17 on the line is showing the electricity sales going up. So we had a large volume increase, and subsequently you'll see an equivalent amount going in the on the orange side. However, starting in 2019 is when the carbon tax came into play. And about that time, we also saw a decline in our year-over-year energy sales. So there you see the volumes are going down. That means volumes aren't driving that increase anymore. It's been driven by price increases. And the price increases, so over the last 3 years, has been carbon tax. We haven't had any system-wide rate increases during that time.
And is this a trend we can anticipate continuing?
You see carbon tax continuing to increase. It's going up by $10 a year, up to $50, and then as proposed, it's going to start increasing by $15 per year. At the same time, the thresholds or allowable emissions that SaskPower can emit are declining, so you're going to see continued pressure on that side. On the rate side, that is something that we look at year to year, and for the coming fiscal year, for the 22-23, we still haven't made a decision on that. We haven't brought anything to cabinet.
How many customer accounts does SAS Power have currently?
If you have the 2019-20 report in front of you, if you turn to page 116, so these are some of our operating and financial statistics we have showing it in 5 years. So if you look at the top section there, you can see the number of Saskatchewan customer accounts. So we have 545,179.
Thank you, and it does break them down by customer type as well, which is appreciated. In regards to power supply, if I'm reading the annual report correctly, 1920 was the first year that sales had not risen since 2009. Is that correct?
Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, on page 10 of 1920.
Oh, 1920, excuse me. So you're on page 10 of 1920?
Report. In 1920, Saskatchewan electricity sales volumes did not increase compared to the previous year. This is the first time that annual sales have not risen since 2009.
That's correct.
And that trend has continued through to 2020, 2021.
Yeah, so we saw a second decline in this last fiscal year driven by COVID impacts. Yes.
And that's fully attributable to COVID. Okay. Did the utility receive any COVID funding, stimulus funding, capital or otherwise?
No, we did not. No.
Returning briefly to power supply, do we anticipate in coming years, I know we're not supposed to speculate, but do we anticipate a rebound?
Yes, this year we're seeing a rebound in energy sales. We started to see it at the tail end of last year as the economy started to restart. In fact, I think in this first quarter, which our report will be released later on, we're up about 9% from last year at the same time, which unfortunately was the worst part of the COVID impact of last year.
Thank you. A few questions now about power importing. So as I understand it, SAS Power moves electricity to and from other jurisdictions through established transmission interconnections. I think it's Manitoba, Alberta, and North Dakota, if I'm remembering accurately. And that has now obviously increased due to the new agreement with Manitoba. And I understand that the tie line between Manitoba and Saskatchewan was just turned on this past winter. I'm wondering when that occurred.
I don't have the exact date, but you're right. That line was upgraded and it began moving more energy. I think it was in the springtime, actually, earlier this spring. March.
Thank you. I understand from reporting in Manitoba that Manitoba had applied to the federal government and had funding approved to build their side, and that Saskatchewan did not apply for that federal funding. Is that correct?
We did apply for that federal funding and we did request it. Unfortunately, due to the rules in the federal government, we were denied our portion of the request. And the reason being is we had established an agreement with Manitoba Hydro. We went through our planning. We began construction of that facility. Manitoba Hydro didn't move as fast as we did. They started late, and because they hadn't actually started that allowed them to receive the funding from the federal government. So we have had many conversations with people in the federal government to try to reverse that decision. Unfortunately, it hasn't changed.
Power did apply for that funding and was rejected by the federal government. And SAS Power was then penalized because work was already underway, whereas on the Manitoba side.
Got it, yes. We were doing our part in moving forward with the project, and because that the actual benefit for transmission interconnection came in after we had already started the project, then we were denied the benefit of funding.
We can't speak to what decisions Manitoba made or why they chose to do it. The agreement was there. So the federal program said work that's commenced after a certain date is eligible for the funding as a new work, not existing or past, as it is with a lot of programs. So the effect of it was, because SAS Power chose to start early, they were no longer qualifying for the program as the people on the Manitoba side who happenstance were started to work later on. I don't think Manitoba had any inside or any different information. That was how the program was structured. I think unfair, because it was essentially the same project interconnecting the two provinces, and certainly something that would benefit energy or emission reduction, because we would be purchasing through that line hydropower from Alberta. There certainly could be some that would go the other way in some situations, but it was an unfortunate situation with the federal government. They chose not to do that, and we'll certainly point it out to people as we go along.
So I understand that then the federal government was unwilling to apply that retroactively. Is it factual to say that the existence of this funding that Manitoba was able to access came as a surprise?
Characterize it as a surprise. It's just another opportunity for funding green power projects, and this was seen to be one of them. And it just, as the minister said, the timing of when this became available conflicted with our construction schedule.
So what I'm trying to clarify, if I'm being a bit dogged on this, is that there was no knowledge that this funding would be available when the Saskatchewan side of the project began.
So, okay. I don't believe so.
And what was the dollar value of that tie-in line construction or upgrade?
I can't recall. It's kind of in the $10 to $20 million range, but I don't know the exact figure. We could.
If that could be provided later, yeah, that'd be great. Moving on to power purchase agreements. As I understand it, SAS Power's responsibility to customers includes, by your own words, developing and delivering on a roadmap for a province's transition to a cleaner energy future, a task that reshapes the way that value, convenience, and choice is delivered to customers. And, SAS Power has a mandate to deliver reliable, sustainable, cost-effective power to these customers as well. I note that SAS Power discusses within the annual report that, believe I'm quoting, in order to reach net zero GHG emissions, it will require an unprecedented reevaluation of how power is generated, along with significant engagement and transformation. Can you share more about that?
Okay. We meet periodically as a government with some of the large power purchasers in the province. All of them have got an ESG mandate and have all come to government saying we have expectations that we are purchasing power that has minimized the impact on the return. And some of them are vague, some of them are fairly specific. But they all come to that. Some of them have come saying, we're prepared to enter into a subscription agreement. There, we would commit to certain things, but you would have to in turn acknowledge that you are going to provide power that's from a clean source. When you ask the individual customers about it, they refer back to the direction that they are given by their directors and in turn their shareholders. So whether it's virtually any of the large 10 purchasers in the province, and they all have the same position. The effect of that is that it will make it difficult to go forward with conventional coal. That's compounded, of course, by the effects of carbon tax. So what SaskPower is working on is a variety of different options, none of which have been taken off the table to produce power in different formats other than what's there now. So I had mentioned earlier about SMRs, and SMRs have got a great deal of appeal because they provide base load power and they would fit well within our grid, 300 to 400 megawatt generating capacity. So that is part of a solution. Our cleanest and most affordable cost supply of energy right now is natural gas, which will have a somewhat limited lifespan as we go forward. And you can ask the officials what the lifespan of a natural gas plant. But we know that we want to expand wind, solar, and the things that we know are most effective at reducing emissions, and want to look at everything we can do to facilitate the hydro that we already have. We've asked SaskPower to look at options, whether there are any locations in the province where we could increase hydropower. They indicate nothing that's of any significant size. We'll continue to watch and monitor for any other opportunities that might arise. You had asked earlier a lot of questions around Boundary Dam and the future of conventional coal, which is of course a challenge because it doesn't fit in with either the ESG requirements of the major customers as well as the problems that are occasioned by carbon tax. So that brings us to the interconnect plan with Manitoba. And as we go forward, I think our long-term goal should be not that we just meet the needs of our province, that we actually become a power exporting entity, that we grow and we look at enhancing the grid so that we can go north-south. Both Manitoba and Alberta have got DC lines, 500 kilovolt lines that they go north-south across the province with the idea that they would ultimately be used for export. I'm told the one in Alberta is massively overbuilt specifically so that they can actually, it's running at about 25% of capacity now. So I think our province should as well be working towards that kind of a long-term goal, and whether it's accomplished through SMRs or whatever other things. But to your point, the fundamental transition has to be underway, has to be taken, and we probably have to go down several paths at the same time to see which ones become the best or the most affordable. But right now, on a per megawatt cost, both from operating cost and from capital cost, natural gas is by far our best option, and will certainly be a part of the fleet for a significant part of time. So I apologize if I went on a sort of a semi-political rant, but I think it's something that is important for our province, and I don't think that we're on a significantly different side or different position than where it is with the opposition. And I think as MLAs, we all want to work towards ensuring that we're able to provide stable, reliable electrical power for the citizens, and hopefully as well that we look at opportunities to be an exporting entity, as long as we're able to find ways to do it in a clean, affordable manner that doesn't attract carbon tax. So with that, and I apologize for not letting the official take the question, but I just wanted to put that out. I'll see if there's anything that...
I have nothing more to add unless there's a follow-up question.
I've noted that officials are always well advised never to contradict the minister, but I'd welcome whatever input they want. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister. It's one of the things I wonder sometimes as sitting here on the opposition bench is how the decision's made, who takes which question. And I sometimes keep track of the questions that I ask that get a response from you as opposed to the officials and reflect on that later. I do actually have a sincere follow-up to your comments. You mentioned the ESG requirements of, I believe it was the 10 larger customers in the province. And genuinely, this is something I'm ignorant on. Do all ESG requirements or standards consistently include nuclear power as something that would be accepted? Because it's controversial sometimes.
Not necessarily, or not specifically. They all look at virtually all of them right now. Are wanting to know about self-generation. They're wanting to know about cogeneration. They're wanting to know about CSG. Those are the significant ones they put forward. I think most of them look at nuclear as being a number of years out, and they're looking at what can be done in the short term. So to be candid, they're not coming in saying do nuclear right now, but none of them have opposed nuclear and are for the, and in some cases we've put them in touch with both Ministry of the Environment and with some of the officials within Sask Power that are working on the file, watching what's taking place in other jurisdictions and trying to make sure that we've got site options and a number of things.
So is it a safe assessment that there are future political and advocacy conversations that would need to take place around SMRs and the relationship to ESG requirements and clean power generation?
Yeah, I think it's a very fair statement.
Thank you. And since you offered officials, what is the lifespan of a natural gas plant or facility?
A coal plant, 25 to 30 years. So that's what when we build like the Chinook Power Station or the Great Plains, we're anticipating running that out to 2050 for both those plants.
The Chinook plant that's current came in under budget and was, I think there was a lot of sophistication within Sask Power at building and developing that project. So the facility in Moose Jaw is a clone of the one at Swift Current, although I think it's slightly higher generating. One's 335 and the other one's 350. Is that
353? You're right.
353. Yeah, so yeah, slightly enhanced, but the buildings, the physical layout and how it fits in the grid are identical from one to the other.
Clarification question: when I read and when I use the term power purchase agreement or PPA, in that in using that term, is Sask Power only the service provider? Minister, you spoke of the 10 biggest customers to Sask Power in relation to PPAs, or in PPAs, can Sask Power be either the power provider or the customer?
Typically, a PPA is when we purchase power from an independent power producer. So we have power purchase agreements with independent producers that generate from natural gas, from wind, and the 2 new wind projects coming on are being built by private sector companies, and we enter into a long-term power purchase agreement, 25-year agreements with them to procure the energy from those sites. We don't pay anything if they don't produce. We simply buy when they're able to produce.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. So I believe in this year's annual report, it cites that 18% of power generated for the utility does come through PPAs. And based on the previous discussion of the longest standing contracts in the mid-2000s, whenever that was, it would have been 0%. Were generated by PPAs.
But please know there wasn't a market. There wasn't a market established for wind energy companies or for solar energy companies or for companies that wanted to produce. As the industry disaggregated And generation companies began to stand on their own, like TransAlta's in Alberta and Capital Power's. They began to take on the generation side of the business, and other companies in Alberta and companies across North America began to purchase power from these entities. And that establishes a market. Prior to that, there was a very little in the way of a market.
No, absolutely. I understand that. That's essentially where I'm going with this question. As the industry, broadly speaking, evolves and changes, this has implications for Sask Power and how I believe people think of Sask Power as a Crown utility. I believe that the majority of people in the province think of Sask Power as the organization that produces and distributes power. But what at least appears to me is occurring, this isn't a value statement by any means, is that there is an increasing shift, and based on the news releases and whatnot, there will continue to be a shift to independent power producers, which I believe inherently changes the nature of how the Crown operates today versus 20 years ago.
It's probably a fair comment. One, there's a strong desire on the part of private companies to come forward. And, you know, we haven't talked about First Nations Power Authority, which is in earliest stages that are wanting to do a variety of different sources of electrical generation. So I think it's a fair comment to assume that more power would be bought by way of power purchase agreements by Sask Power, and certainly more opportunities for unique sources of power. You know, there's always opportunities that appear to become, oh, what about biomass? What about this? What about that? And I don't think it's appropriate for Sask Power to go out and be the advocate or the proponent for those things. Those are things that would come forward from the private sector. They may or may not work, but where they do come forward, I think Sask Power is always interested in being a customer. But the primary obligation that Sask Power has is to provide reliable baseload power for the residents and for the businesses of the province. And if you have a number of different smaller ones that are around that may not be reliable and may not be on site, and I know when people talk about cogen or self-gen, you say, okay, do you want to partner? Do you want to be part of the grid? There's always a reluctance on the part of those customers to say, well, we're not sure that we want to commit in the contract to being a reliable power. We want to be able to do it sort of as it works for our business. And I think Sask Power understands that. But those they still have the obligation to be there to provide stable baseload power. So if whatever entity it is decides, oh, well, we're going to shut down our cogen plant because we don't like it, or we just want to take it offline for maintenance, it's their right to do it, and Sask Power will have to be there at the flick of a switch, or not even the flick of a switch, to continue to provide power as they shut their switch off. So that's the challenge that they've got, and I've had the discussion with a number of those companies. Do you want to partner with? Are you prepared to do it? And almost invariably the answer is, well, we want to provide, we want to be able to be part of the energy solutions, we want to be a vendor to Sask Power, we want you to buy it from us at a very competitive price, and naturally those discussions will take place at a business level. But as far as them becoming part of the underlying grid to provide baseload power, they would of course have to have all the reliability and expectations. That has not been forthcoming.
Thank you, Minister. I was going to ask what percentage of facilities are owned independently or which are owned by Sask Power, but I was thinking it might just be simpler to go through the map on page 119. So obviously the coal capacity is owned fully by Sask Power. In regards to hydro, Athabasca,
Sask Power.
All hydro is Sask Power, and natural gas.
Most of it, probably about 900 megawatts today, is owned by Sask Power. And now we're on a different page. Page 4. So there's our Yeah, there's a table on page 4 which highlights the capacities, which are
Of the natural gas, is Meadow Lake an IPP
Meadow Lake is owned by SAS Power.
in cogen?
That's an IPP. That's Canadian Power Holdings.
North Battleford is SAS Power?
Ford Energy Center, no, that's owned by Northland Power.
Yellowhead?
Yellowhead is owned by SAS Power.
Forgive me if I mispronounce this, Ermine?
Ermine, yeah, near Corrobert, it's owned by SAS Power.
And Landis?
Landis is owned by SAS Power.
Corey?
Corey is owned by SAS Power. It was a joint venture between ourselves and ATCO up until a year and a half ago, and we purchased the assets as ATCO exited the fossil business.
Thank you. And Queen Elizabeth?
SAS Power.
Spy Hill?
Northland Power.
And Chinook?
Chinook is SAS Power.
And then for wind?
Wind, better that we just say we own the Centennial Wind facility and the Cypress Wind facility. Yeah, everything else is, has been built and developed and is owned by independent power producer.
And solar would all be independently owned?
That is correct.
Including, of course, like the First Nations power authorities and the
Yes.
contract being.
Yeah.
And then obviously all the small independent power producers would be independently owned, and obviously import power purchase agreements are with other jurisdictions.
With other jurisdictions, correct.
Yeah. So I guess not to continue to spend all of my time on this, is it a fair assessment that excluding natural gas, the majority of new low emissions power generation within SAS Power comes from independent power producers? Yeah.
Biomass, the geothermal plant that's under construction, yes. It's all independent power producers. As markets have developed over the last 10, 20 years, and that market comes to maturity, the prices are as low as you can get anywhere. And the contracts that we enter secure that supply. To the minister's point, we certainly have to back up wind and solar with other sources of energy, but that's our job to do that as the utility, to provide that safe, reliable, and cost-effective power. Low market prices means we can take advantage of that and keep power rates low for everybody in the province.
So for business planning and for, maintaining that support for customers, baseload power is where the utility will continue to invest.
Okay, baseload power is different than the intermittent from renewables. The baseload power that we need in this province is to run the businesses and the operations of the mining companies that operate 24/7, and we need 22 to 2,400 megawatts of power 24/7, and then the rest of it fluctuates as the winter and the summer and the load goes up and down during the day, and businesses and houses shut down at nighttime. So that 22 to 2,400 is provided by coal and gas today predominantly, and we use our hydro stations for peaking. So when everybody goes home at lunch and turns on their oven or at dinner time and turns on their TV and their lights, then we run our hydro stations for a while, and then we shut them off and let the water pond up. That baseload energy is a requirement of this province. We're very resource rich, and we have to make sure that we provide that stable, reliable power for those customers out there.
Thanks. What I'm trying to understand here is if it's, the minister, you spoke of a goal of having Saskatchewan positively as a power exporter, potentially. Exporting nationally and potentially internationally. And understanding the markets exist, SAS Power has shifted in the past 20 years from wholly owning generation facilities, regardless of the source, to purchasing power from these independently or privately owned generation facilities. And so perhaps this is a question to you, Minister, in this wonderful and hopefully attainable future in which SAS Power is a net exporter of power. Would that generating capacity may not be wholly owned by SAS Power in the way that it traditionally has?
It's not at the present time. There's been a shift to people that have done self-gen, co-gen, and a variety of other things. But if a First Nations Power Authority came and wanted to develop a generating facility of one type or another, we'd certainly look at a partnership with them. The underlying thing that has to be is that it's reliable and part of the grid that's there. You're likely aware that during the last winter, when Texas got into trouble, we were selling electricity into the northern states from Sask Power because they were shifting their loads south. So we were in effect helping them out. And I think the other sort of the fact that we're sharing with them and vice versa at times is an indication of the need for reliability, and that Texas made the decision that they wanted to be an island of themselves. They set up their own regulatory authority, and when the system collapsed, it collapsed all the way across the state. We can't have that in a province that is as cold and inhospitable as our province. We have to maintain the reliability. You know, we see what happens even for a few hours when there's a lightning strike and takes down a line. So the reliability factor isn't being there. So I don't think we want to see this in the context of a privatization of Sask Power, but we want to see this as a way of inviting other options and other methods of doing it, and whether it's First Nations Power Authority or whether it's one of the mining companies that wants to do it by way of cogen. I don't think we want to say no to anything, but but Sask Power has the obligation to provide reliable baseload power all the way across the province. And as much as we like solar and we like wind, when it's night, there's no solar, and when the wind goes down, as it usually does when it's -40, you don't have the option to those. So anyway, that's if you're looking whether we're going to privatize Sask Power, no, we're going to look at options and partnerships, and whether it's FNPA or whatever, we'll certainly be prepared to have the discussion.
Thank you, Minister. As a good New Democrat, I'm of course glad to hear there are no plans to privatize Sask Power. It does seem to me a shift that Sask Power is making from a Crown Corporation which owned all of the power generation facilities 20 odd years ago to now being in, I hesitate to say a different business, but now focus more on transmission and distribution and purchasing and potentially trading of power.
I think we've become more of a global economy, and I think we look at as we go through the changes away from fossil fuel, we have to look at a collection of more diverse options. I think I'd indicated earlier that nothing is taken off the table, and whether it be biomass, hydrogen, whatever options are there, they have to look at, and a lot of because none of those entities or those power production methods are really well defined or sophisticated enough at the present time to come online. We have to look at partnering, whether it be with universities or a variety of other entities, to see what things will work in the long run. So
It's good to hear, Minister, a good to hear nothing's off the table when ideology dictates these type of decisions. I think that's when poor decisions get made. So that's a.
It's fair to say that it's an issue that goes beyond political views or political parties. I think at this case, or this point in time, we're all Saskatchewanians. We all care about ensuring that we're able to stay viable, and we've seen mistakes that were made elsewhere, and we want to avoid those and go forward. So thank you for that.
Thank you. After that moment of unity, I will ask some questions about the Manitoba Hydro contract, which of course is considerable. $5 billion is even recognizing the term of the contract, a lot of money, whichever way you slice it. And not being overly familiar with how $5 billion contracts tend to go, was this contract or our power purchase agreements like this tendered in the traditional sense?
There is another Manitoba around that's got a bunch of hydro. I suppose we could have tendered it to Quebec and seen whether they wanted to ship it across, but I'll let the officials do it. I think it's a matter of knowing that Manitoba had access to hydro and had access to hydro that was not attracting a carbon tax, and it was the shortest distance. But I shouldn't, pardon my humor.
So first of all, let me just say, but all long-term energy contracts are expensive. What you're seeing in $5 billion may be a shock. It's normal in the course of our business. It's normal in the course of other businesses, other utility businesses across Canada when they enter into long-term contracts. So $5 billion sounds large, but remember, it's over 30 years. And so you break that down, and that's the energy that we would buy that wouldn't attract, to the minister's point, any carbon tax, against the energy we generate here in the province that would attract carbon tax. So you start to look at the economics of what that looks like. We do this to provide the best deal for every customer in the province, and this is a good long-term deal that supports the transition away from fossil energy. The options available to us on the hydro side in Saskatchewan are much more limited. We don't have the hydro capacity that Manitoba Hydro does, and they have available capacity. They have available transmission line access or capacity that can get it into or close to the Saskatchewan border, and we would be responsible for partnering with them to build an appropriate line if we wanted to import any more than that. But the lines that we have will support the contract that's in place. And as we look to the future, additional hydro energy, additional renewable energy here in the province will only add to greening up our grid, which is what I understand is where the future needs to go. To the minister's point, a lot of our industrial customers are looking to green up their supply chain. That's why they ask us, how much renewable energy are you putting onto the grid? How much emissions are you going to be putting into the atmosphere each and every year? Because as part of their supply chain, we're a key part of it. So we have to be moving in the right direction, but moving in a way that is economical, cost-effective, and ensures reliability. And the other point I just want to follow up on, and I make this point in many different conversations, you cannot store electricity yet on a large scale other than in hydro stations, and the storage is actually the reservoir. So allowing or having strong interties in a future renewable-centric world is going to be vitally important, because when the wind stops blowing in Saskatchewan, it may be blowing in Manitoba or in Ontario or somewhere in the U.S. where we can import that power and make sure we stay strong, and vice versa. We can support other jurisdictions. That's what strong interties are for. Interties are important. The contract that we've entered into with Manitoba Hydro is for a specific amount of energy for 20 years. and we still rely on them, and they still rely on us for that resiliency during times when the grids need it. And that's part of the cooperation that all utilities have across Canada and across North America.
Thank you. So at what level then are these contracts negotiated? Is this something that you undertake in with your executives in your capacity at SAS Power, or is this, or I should say, and is this a discussion that also happens at the political level?
It begins with us and our requirement for additional energy sources. We have planning teams that work together with Manitoba Hydro planning teams. We're in constant communication with them. And we work on opportunities and options that work for both of us. We would negotiate a price and a contract that works for us and is economic against other options that we have available here in the province, and that's why we have entered into the agreements we have with Manitoba Hydro. And at that point, if it becomes an economical option for us for a block of energy that we can count on from 2022 to 2052, we bring that forward through our board of directors. We answer all the questions. We look at the economics closely. We look at the options. Ultimately, the approval for large amounts of energy, either building a new facility here in the province or an intertie with a neighboring jurisdiction, makes its way through CIC board and ultimately a cabinet decision. That's the way the Power Corporation Act is written.
And so within SAS Power, for the record, obviously there's different business cases looked at when you're identifying the need for, pardon me, I didn't write down the megawatts that this is bringing online. I think 250? 215.
215, yeah.
215. So when SAS Power identifies the need for 215 megawatts, I imagine there are a variety of scenarios looked at that would ultimately contribute to the decision to pursue a contract of, recognizing your comments aside, 215 is still a decent portion of Saskatchewan's generation. So what are would there be consideration given to when you do that business case analysis, local generation, whether it's through more natural gas or what have you? I'm not trying to bias the answer. And then ultimately the decision is made, I assume, to get the most reliable and cost-effective and stable power for the people of the province.
I'm not sure if you're asking when the decision is made to use it as to when the generating capacity runs out and they've got to start using Remender, or when the decision is made to purchase.
Yes, when the decision is made to purchase, we would, evaluate it against the next lowest cost or the next highest cost of energy. As natural gas prices have come down over the past 8 to 9 years, and North America has enjoyed very, very low natural gas prices, as we're all aware, in $2 per GJ. Natural gas generation became the generation of choice across North America. Canada has now imposed a carbon price on emissions from all fossil energy, so whether it's coal or whether it's natural gas. The U.S. hasn't done that yet. So there's no carbon price that's attracting or being attracted by gas generation. Conventional coal continues to get retired in the U.S., and they're building natural gas generation in the U.S. As we begin to look at the effects of a carbon tax and the potential of an increase in carbon tax, as was added on a couple of years ago, moving up to $170 a ton by the year 2030, that's a significant carbon penalty that makes the hydro option begin to look much more favorable. And indeed, even we evaluate it against a potential cost for hydro generation in our own province. But the issue is we don't have that much additional capacity available to us that's easy to access. A lot of it is in the far north. And by the time you build a transmission line to get it way down here, it's not very economic. So we look at all these options and we look at what's going to provide the best economic business case for SaskPower and ultimately for all the customers in the province for the next 25, 30 years. We make these long-term decisions every 2 or 3 years, and we look at what the best option is. That's why Chinook was built. That's why we went ahead with the Great Plains facility in Moose Jaw, and we'll be making other decisions in the upcoming years as well.
I fell down a strange rabbit hole once. You can tell I'm a very, very cool person reading old SaskPower exploratory surveys for additional hydro capacity, and I think it was from the 70s, and it involved, I believe, flooding Nipawin, which I'm by no means suggesting, but I appreciate your comments in regards to hydro capacity. And so I'm not going to apologize, but perhaps I'll explain why to you some of my questions may seem fairly obvious to you who do this all every day, but the only details that we have are really what's contained in press releases and annual reports and what I've been able to read through some of the reporting in the papers in Manitoba. So it's quite limited in terms of the information available by which to inform myself to ask these questions. And so I guess just two last questions on the Manitoba Hydro contract. Is the cost, having never negotiated one of these myself, is the cost stable? And by that I mean if when this goes online, is the cost per megawatt going to be the same to Saskatchewan 6 months from now as it will be in 25 years?
Every contract, there's escalations built in, annual escalations that are built in to account for things on their side and things on our side. But again, when we look at it compared to the other options, and we'll build escalations for, for operating a facility, for example, the cost of labor goes up on year over year. That has to be factored into on their side. But we look at it in terms of the entire bill that's going to be paid over the life of that contract and whether it's still an economic and viable choice, and we bring that forward. Our mandate is to provide cost-effective electricity. So bringing forward an expensive option is not the right way to do business. It wouldn't be good for the province overall, and that's why we focus very hard on getting the best deal we can from whatever option we can out there. From in the utility business, we would consider our choices agnostic. If it's technologically sound and it can achieve the economics that we need, then that's what we're going to move on that particular choice when that choice comes up.
So I fibbed. I'm going to add one more question in there. Is the total cost of that agreement, is that fixed, or is there a potential for it to increase or, I suppose, decrease, given some of those factors that you've discussed?
No, there's no potential for it to double, if that's what you're thinking, in 8 years because Manitoba wants to do something. No, that's not the way these contracts are structured. There will be an option for us to extend that agreement at some point in time, and we would certainly look at that when that time comes. And that's how most of these long-term power purchase agreements are structured.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Now, I understand also through some of the reporting in Manitoba that former Premier Wall was doing some significant consulting and reporting with Manitoba Hydro in regards to some of those two new dams. Pardon me, I can't remember the name of them, but to the tune of, I believe, $2 million in regards to the economic viability of them. And I'm curious if there were any discussions between the SAS Power executive or management with the former premier?
Linda.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Moving on to likely some more routine matters. In regards to the financial highlights with SAS Power, there's $22 million in the 2020-2021 financial highlights. There's $22 million attributed to late payment charges, inspections, fly ash sales, which was partially offset by CO2 sales. Would someone be able to speak to the nature of those late payment charges?
Do you have a specific page you're looking at?
Question. I believe, I think perhaps page 34, but that's just scribbled in handwriting, so give me one moment, please. No. It would be under, pardon me, it's page 33 of 2020-2021. It notes other revenue decreased $22 million down to $103 million, and the decrease was mainly attributable to lower revenue from customer contributions, late payment charges, gas and electrical inspections, and fly ash sales, partially offset by CO2 sales.
The late payment charges, I believe, was your question. What does that refer to? So that is generally charges that for customers for late payment. So when their bills are in arrears and they're not making payment. Last year, we suspended payments and we suspended the interest on that as well. And then we've given those customers that have that use the interest waiver program 1 year to pay it back. So as a result, you're going to see a significant decline in our late payment charges.
Thank you. So that 22 million is just those, is a portion of that?
It's a portion of that, yeah. It's not 22 million, no.
And for the committee, can you remind us who the contracts are for fly ash? Who's the purchaser of fly ash?
Well, it's mainly, I'm not sure of exactly who they are, but it's mainly used in cement. Yeah.
Nature of those contracts hasn't changed substantially since, yeah.
No.
Because am I correct in remembering that's also an additional byproduct from Boundary in particular?
Then from Boundary Dam and from the Boundary Dam 3 facility.
But it's through our precipitators, not through the carbon capture process. Yeah.
The other expenses category of the financial highlights does seem to vary significantly year over year, which I suppose is why it's called other expenses. And in 1920, this was attributed to a $30 million adjustment, which was made in regards to a settlement for environmental remediation.
Just checking on the one. So in that period, that's related to a potential settlement with PBCN. It's a long-standing dispute that we've had with that community. It's not been finalized as of yet. However, we set up a provision to represent the amount that we think the final agreement will be at.
Pardon me, I didn't hear you. Which community was that?
Oh, it's Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation, or PBCN.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And in this most recent year, 2020-2021, there was a $40 million decrease, which was attributed to the awarding of an arbitration in relation to recognized income. I'm wondering if you could provide some details on that.
That relates to a dispute that we had that goes back to the construction of Boundary Dam, the carbon capture facility. And last year, SaskPower was successful in the dispute. So we were awarded about $70 million, and a portion of that went to income, and a portion of it we adjusted our balance sheet with. So.
Am I right in remembering, was that with SNC Lavalin? No.
I think the nature of the agreement is such that we would disclose the parties.
Public?
It would.
So the require that it remains confidential. Yeah.
Just a general question for my own elucidation as critic. I note that I believe annual interest payments made by the corporation are down kind of $5 million year over year. Is that a trend we can anticipate moving forward, or is it likely to kind of remain consistent in that $420 million range?
On the interest payments?
Yeah.
Yeah, we did see a decline. A lot of that has been attributed to what happened with COVID-19 and what happened in the financial markets in Canada and really across the world. We saw a dramatic decline in borrowing rates as the federal government started their various programs to increase the amount of capital. So SaskPower benefited significantly from that, and we're able to reduce our overall expense. In total, we have about $7 million in debt. So our interest costs are generally going to rise as we continue to add to our asset base and add to our balance sheet. However, we will see a little bit of a decline in the coming year. We have a couple of debt issues that are coming due. They were issued in the early 90s. They carry interest rates at around 10%. About $250 million each will be coming due. So that gives us an opportunity to refinance that at today's interest rates and save money. But other than those smaller adjustments, generally speaking, you should expect that our interest costs will rise as our borrowing rises to renew our infrastructure.
10%, that's ugly. Yeah. Although appreciate the era in which I suppose that was decided. And another question, and I don't know whether I can get away with saying this, but I'm going to try literally just for my own information, although I recognize I'm sitting here about to ask questions about the carbon tax. But in terms of some of the charts and reports that are contained, I believe on page 35 of this year's annual report. I'm just trying to understand how they're presented in the reporting. So my understanding is the federal carbon tax payment for the 2019 calendar year is due in 2021. And this is the $56 million noted in this year's annual report?
So okay. The 2019 expense, so it's 56 total. 55 is going to the federal government, which we've already made that payment. 1 million went to some of our IPP producers, who then take it and they remit it to the federal government. We process that through them. For this coming year, it'd be another $85 million that SaskPower will have to make payment in December of this year.
After that is the $38 million, correct?
Well, that was only for 3 months.
For the 3 months.
But yes, it'll be a larger amount by the end.
And then, Mr. King, are you able to help me understand the cumulative balance differential? Like in 2019, it's, I'm not sure if I'm reading this correctly, but it looks like a $6 million under collection. And then in 2021, it looks like it's $34 million. Yes.
Looking at the page 35 of the 2021?
I believe I am.
Okay, so if you look at that one, what we are doing with this account, the intent of the carbon tax with SaskPower is that we wanted to be revenue neutral. However, at the beginning of each year, we have to estimate how much carbon we're going to emit and essentially how much tax we're going to pay. Then as the year progresses, that number will change. So it'll change based on how we run our facilities, how much hydro we have, how much gas we need to run, how much people consume. And so we'll see variations in the actual carbon output from what we planned versus what we collect. We've committed that we are going to keep track of that separately. And because our carbon tax increases don't go through our rate panel process, they're just passed along. Our intent is to keep them neutral. So if you look at this one, so we have a cumulative balance of $34 million that we need to refund to our customers. And what we will do is when we set the carbon tax adjustment for the 22 calendar year, we'll take that into account to redistribute that. And you'll probably see a lower, obviously you'll see a lower rate increase than you otherwise would have for carbon taxes.
So for your average person who's looking at the carbon tax line on their power bill, based on what you've said, SaskPower obviously collects what they anticipate that may be higher or lower, which will then lead to an adjustment accordingly with whether that's been higher or lower. For those situations in which there's been an over collection, I suppose, when there's more money than was needed, is that, and you've indicated that money's held separately, is that money invested? Okay.
Yeah, nothing extravagant, but the interest on it goes into the account, and that again is refunded to customers on it. So we keep that separate.
And is there reporting anywhere, just out of like genuine curiosity, where that investment earnings jumps? I'm sorry if I missed it.
I don't know that we've shown it specifically. We do certainly have it in our accounts. It would be in the other recoveries expenses column, but it'd be part of that. Yeah.
So it is recorded somewhere. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my last question regarding the FCTVA, or I'm not sure what acronym you use to refer to it as. Can you help me just understand that that amount's payable? You mentioned to the IPPs. Do we basically just, the money funnels through them effectively?
When they sell us power, essentially, if there's one of our gas facilities, they're subject to carbon taxes as well. And so as part of that agreement, we're going to reimburse them for that carbon tax, just like we reimburse them for the cost of the power. So a portion of the carbon taxes we pay flow through them to the federal government, as opposed to going directly from the facilities that generate carbon tax that SaskPower owns.
That amount payable is obviously based on actuals. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to page, I believe it's page 37 in the financial condition. I believe it notes that long-term debt is up 5% in 2019 and then an additional 7% in 2020. Is that trend simply the increase in borrowing?
Overall, our debt for the last 2 years, our net debt levels have declined over the last 2 years. So you're looking at the one line that shows the long-term debt growing by 7%, but you'll also see our short-term advances just above it fell by 68%, or $647 million. And so when we look at our total debt portfolio, we look at our long-term debt, we look at our short-term borrowings, we'll look at our sinking funds, which is monies we've invested through the province, and then we look at our cash balance. During COVID, SaskPower increased a lot of its cash balance during that time, and we also, because of some of the issues happening in the credit markets, we moved a lot of our short-term borrowings into long-term. However, overall, our total debt has come down in the last couple of years.
And the credit review or the credit rating review, is that what is the regularity that that happens with? Like it's obviously, I think as was noted last year, was under review and trending negatively for lack of a better term. And it is down this year. Is this an annual review?
Our credit rating is essentially the credit rating of the province. There's not a specific one for SaskPower. We really just inherit what happens with the province. I know the province meets at least once annually, but a credit rating can be adjusted, you know, on any quarter by any one of the agencies. But there's ongoing discussions between the Ministry of Finance, CIC officials. But SaskPower itself, we generally don't deal with the credit ratings themselves because we're just taking what the province gets.
Thank you. And just one last question for information. It notes that I believe in this year's annual report that credit facility is down $1 million. What from last year? What does that mean?
It's referring to some of the when we have on our natural gas program. What we'll do is lock in the price of natural gas and for what we're expected to use. So we take a portion of what we're expected to buy or consume over the coming years, and we'll fix that price. In some cases, we'll do it with a supplier, and other times we'll do it through a financial institution. When the mark-to-market gets to a certain point, so if the price of gas drops and we've fixed it in at, let's say, $3 and it falls to $2, at the end of the day, we're going to have to pay for that difference. We're required at certain points to provide a credit facility for the banks or the suppliers, and it's really just they don't want to have too much credit with SaskPower, so we put that aside. As we've seen gas prices coming up in the last little while, a lot of the hedges that we've had in place, which were negative, are now turned the other way, and they're positive. So you're seeing a decline last year. You'll see more of a decline going on this year.
Thank you. And just circling back briefly to the long-term, short-term debt question. I did want to say for the record, whoever did it, I have to applaud in the 2019-20 annual report, the individual who picked green as the middle color for the register on long-term debt. I chuckled when I looked at that. But in 2019, it was up to, I believe, 305 million. It was up 305 million, and this year, as discussed, it was up another $432 million, I believe. I'm just looking for comment, a little bit more additional comment on whether or not there are concerns about the long-term debt of SaskPower.
Okay, if you've got the 2020-21 annual report in front of you, if you go to page 40, I like this layout better than the balance sheet to talk about our debt, because this is how we look at it. So you see here we've shown our long-term debt, our short-term advances, those power purchase agreements that we were talking about earlier, the ones that are take or pay, or where we have capacity pieces of it, we add that to our debt as well. So you see we have about $8 billion there, and then we reduce it by debt retirement funds and cash equivalents. So we come up to about $7 billion in debt. So you see overall, compared to last year, it's actually down $120 million once you take all the various elements. I think looking at our debt levels is something SaskPower, and certainly for myself, it's one of the key things that we're continually looking at. Rising debt levels, which over the long term, we do expect that that will happen. I think there's a couple things we look at. One, what's it relative to our asset base? So if you're borrowing to build assets, that's a good thing. If you're borrowing to operate, that's not a good thing. So we believe that's good levels of debt. The other one we do is we benchmark ourselves against other utilities to see what's an appropriate level of debt. And one of the marks that we use is what we call our debt ratio, our percent debt ratio, which if you look at the bottom of that table, you can see it there at 71.4%. So last year it was 72.6%. And so that's just looking at how much debt is in your entire capital structure. And for a utility like SAS Power that is government-owned, that is backed by the province, we compare ourselves to others like us, like a BC Hydro, a Manitoba Hydro, those types of entities. Having something in that 70% to 75% range is a very comfortable place to be. You'll see other jurisdictions, Manitoba, for example, with the borrowing they've had to do for their hydro facilities, and that's part of why there was a review and all these other actions happening. You'll see them moving closer towards 90%. We've tried to keep ours in that 70 to 75% range. We were about 75% 3 to 4 years ago, and we've been able to start bringing it down. And so overall, we're fairly comfortable with where our debt levels are.
Thank you. And this is likely a very, I'm not going to say stupid question. There are no stupid questions, but probably an elementary one. Is SAS Power subject to, how do interest rate fluctuations impact that? You cited the 10% interest rate fixed from the early 90s.
So where interest rates impact us, so for our long-term debt, the interest rates are essentially locked in. So you're exposed when you have to renew that debt when it comes due and you have to renegotiate it. So in the case of the debt from the 90s, it's a benefit to us because interest rates have come down. So that's one avenue. The other is new debt. So when you're building new facilities, when we're building a Moose Jaw plant, for example, or other new generation that we build, whether that's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years down the road, you're certainly exposed to whatever changes in the interest rates are at the time that you borrow. And the last more element is on your short-term borrowings. So your short-term borrowings, generally, that's anything under a year in terms of maturity. So there you'll see more potential volatility from year to year. So if interest rates really drop, we'll benefit from the amount of short-term that we have, and if they rise, you're exposed on that side. So on the short-term, you can see we have about $300 million at the end of last year that's exposed to more current fluctuations.
So nothing like wildly complicated or unusual, just by nature of being a power utility, fairly?
No, it's pretty straight.
Great, thank you. I have just a handful more general questions, recognizing we are getting close to the end of our time here. One general question. I noted in, I think, 2019, a 1-year decrease in the average estimated service life of each major asset class, I believe would cost $31 million. And then this most recent year, it's up to 33. Is it, that number will likely continue to rise just as time goes on, or is that expected to plateau at a certain point?
Yeah, so what that number is referring to is the volatility involved in the estimates that we make. So a big number on our income statement is our depreciation expense. And so you can see for 2020-21, it's almost $600 million that we have to record to amortize that $12 billion in assets that we have. So what that number is meant to recognize is that just the size of the assets that we have and how much just changing the way we estimate how long those lives are going to be. So if all of our assets were to decrease in life by a year due to environmental or regulatory or operating concerns, it's just showing the amount of sensitivity to changes in our estimates, and that's all that's really intended to do. And you're absolutely right. As we continue to build up our balance sheet and add more generation, transmission, distribution, that potential sensitivity will increase. Yep.
And independently owned power production facilities, those would not be contributing to that number?
Based on a contract that we have with them, yes.
Thank you. Just one more question about capital expenditures. The logistics warehouse complex, is this the facility being kind of being built out at the GTH? Okay. And the existing assets that's replacing will be what's going to happen to the existing facilities?
Our warehouse right now is in the middle of downtown on 6th and Lorne, and there's a number of buildings there and a site that the intention would be to sell those assets once we're out of there. There's certainly an opportunity in the commercial market to sell and recoup some money on that.
And the initial budget, I believe, was $220 million. Is that consistent? Has that increased or decreased?
It hasn't changed, and that's for what we call both phase 1 and phase 2 of the project. We've done some site work, and we're going ahead with phase 1 today. There's an RFP in the marketplace for construction of the buildings that we need in phase 1. If we go all the way to phase 2, then we're looking at 220.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Just a handful more questions. The facility with the Meadow Lake Tribal Council, which I believe is using like sawmill revenue. Where is that? Is that fuel coming from within Saskatchewan?
Yes, all that fuel is coming from the Meadow Lake area. So there's a mill up there that is going to be providing most of the wood chips. And other sawmills in and around that area, I think, are also being considered by the owners of the biomass facility. So Meadow Lake Tribal Council has been really the one fronting that project, and it's under construction, and we're looking forward to a completion date here in the next month or two.
And it's noted in, believe it's actually the 1920 annual report, that there was an RFP out for the delivery of 300 megawatts of power by 2023. Can you comment on the status of that?
We have gone ahead with the RFP for 300 megawatts, but we broke it into options for the producers to either bid a 200 megawatt block or a 100 megawatt block. And at the end, after all the evaluations, we're proceeding with the 200 megawatts at this point in time. And we're working with the proponent right now as we look to, looking at the project schedule and when that project is going to actually come online.
And is there a date anticipated when more public information will be available about that?
As soon as we're able to make a public statement, we have to get their agreement with the proponent and make sure everything lines up. There'll be a public statement.
Thank you. And sorry, just for my own clarification, you're proceeding with the $200 million or 200 megawatt portion. Is there the intention to pursue the additional 100 at a later time?
We haven't decided yet. That's going to be subject to further review here. With the market prices for wind, as I mentioned earlier, we're trying to optimize that and take advantage of the best price that we can. We also have 575 megawatts coming on this fall from our Blue Hills facility and the facility near Assiniboia. So those ones are, the one at Assiniboia is producing a lot of energy today, but the commercial date was anticipated for this fall, plus or minus a few turbines, just because of the delays in the supply chain across the world for parts and components. So we're quite happy to see those two facilities coming on this fall.
Thank you. The 10% off power bills across the province, as we're nearing, I believe that program ends in November 2021. I've tried to ask questions about this before and not gotten much information, so I'm just, has the demand for that program been greater or less than anticipated? I know it's 10%, but.
Well, it was applied across the province, so it wasn't a matter that there was a demand for it. I think everybody liked the idea that they were getting a 10% reduction. So I can tell you it's been well received by the individual customers and the commercial customers as people are coming out of the pandemic. It's made a significant difference. As you're likely aware, the funding for that came from the GRF rather than from Sask Power, so it should not impact their bottom line at the end of the year. But it was certainly something that was well received, and I think that the timing of it, given that we're coming out of the pandemic, and hopefully that continues as well. I'm not sure what today's numbers look like or anything, but I know that where everybody's watching what's going to happen over the next few weeks. But it certainly made a big difference. I don't know whether, Mike, you want to add anything to that or not. But.
No, I think it certainly was well received from all the feedback we have. And as the minister said, we're being reimbursed through the General Revenue Fund, so we're kept whole as a utility. So.
I just understood there was some reporting function back and forth in order to obviously establish what 10% would actually look like.
Ministry of Finance and made sure that all the numbers were reconciled properly even before we received any funding back through them.
Okay, I think I will ask 2 more questions and then hand it over to Chairperson Dennis. I'm looking for just general comment on the sale of MRM Cogen in Alberta in terms of just what that situation was all about, who it was sold to, when this investment was initially made, yeah, just the course of the investment.
So the sale of the Muskeg River Mine facility last year, it was really brought about by, ATCO was our partner on that. We had a 30% stake in that facility. It's about the 172 megawatt facility located near the Fort Mac in Alberta. And it supplied the oil sands up there. The other facility that we had with ATCO was the Cogen facility, which was here in Saskatchewan at the Nutrien Cory mine. And there we had a 50-50 relationship. With the Cory one, the difference was all the power was coming into Sask Power was the buyer. The MRM one was external to Sask Power, and all that energy went into Alberta. The reason that the sale came about was because ATCO decided strategically to divest itself of all its natural gas holdings. So when they came to us, because we owned part of those two, both the Cory and the MRM, we started working with them. And at that time, it provided us the opportunity with the Cory one. It's a strategic asset for Sask Power. We need that energy, and it's a key part of our baseload power. So we purchased that component. And then with the MRM one section, we ended up selling it to the entity that bought out the rest of ATCO's portfolio.
Thank you, Mr. King. My last question for the officials is in terms of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions anticipated by 2030, I believe it was estimated to be about 50% of 2005 levels. Obviously, part of this is in, I guess I'm in terms of expectation management going forward. I know COVID has had impacts both ways in terms of emissions and in terms of power consumption. But I'm looking for some comment on what that jump is attributable to.
The retirement by regulation of conventional coal facilities, replacing them with natural gas and/or renewables together. When you convert to a natural gas plant, your emissions drop by 60% on a per megawatt basis, so that's significant. Renewables, of course, there's no emissions whatsoever. So as we operate our fleet differently over the next 8 to 9 years, we're going to be in a position to drop our overall emissions intensity. And that's the path we're on, and I'm quite confident we're going to meet that 50% by 2030.
Positive note to end on.
Seeing that we've reached our allotted time, I will now ask a member to move that we conclude the consideration of the 2019, 2020, 2020, 2021 Sask Power Annual Reports, the 2019, 2020, and the 2020-21 North Point Energy Solutions, Inc. financial statements, and the 2019-2020 Power Corporation Superannuation Plan Annual Report. Mr. Tim McLeod has moved that we conclude the consideration. Is that agreed? Carried. That concludes our business with Sask Power this morning. Minister, do you have any final comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you and your staff. I know we're approaching Stacey's last day here, so she'll be moving on. So thank her for years of putting up with our poor humor. And I'd like to thank all of the committee members for the work that they've done, as well as the auditor and the auditor staff that was here. I think it's having the audit process as an external process that makes it gives us a better sense of direction and the public confidence in our institution. So we thank them for that. I'd like to as well thank the Ledge Assembly staff, Hansard, building security, the building staff for their ongoing work. But in particular today, I'd like to thank the SBC officials, the Crown workers. I've had the file long enough. I've gone through several power outages, and I know that when there's been a fire or major outages, it's the hardworking uniform workers that go out and are usually out on top of a power pole or digging through muskeg or whatever else to restore power to the citizens. So, and IBW as well. Sorry, to those people, we thank them for the adverse circumstances in which they work in maintaining the power and keeping us all warm, safe, and dry. So I want to thank all of the people at Sask Power, but in particular those that have helped us through some difficult times.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Young, do you have any closing comments?
I would of course echo the thanks expressed by the minister to the officials here today for joining us for probably a longer morning than it was for me. It felt like it flew by, as well as the auditors, building staff, the video team, Hansard and Minister, your staff, and those in your office as well. As well as the many individuals who wrote into my office with questions about Sask Power, and I thank you for your willingness to engage in dialogue and accountability and transparency on this file. It's much appreciated. Also echo thanks to the staff and clerks, with of course a special thanks to Stacey, since I believe it's our last day together in the chambers, and while I've only been here 10 months, Stacey, you've been a thoughtful and generous support over those 10 months. And I can only imagine the capable and graceful impact that you've had in the duration of your tenure here. And I wish you joy, health, and opportunity in the mountains. And I thank you for your contribution to the history of decision making in this place.
Thank you. We'll now recess till 1 p.m.